Between marble shadows and laundry lines, Rome breathes in warm bread and incense. The streets are poised to show how ordinary hours became the rhythm that outlived emperors. Tonight, we journey into the story of Rome, where the Tiber loosens its night mist, and the 7 hills rise like patient backs under a pale, awakening sky. You stand at the edge of first light, listening to water hush against stone, to the soft pad of sandals in alleys that smell of damp clay and fennel. The city breathes through atrium oculi and through the mouths of street-side shrines, a slow exhale that carries olive smoke, the brine of fish sauce, the crumb of yesterday's bread. The rooftops hold the last coolness, while shutters open, one by one, revealing fresco colors that the sun will soon warm into a living fresco of red, gold, and soft earth. You feel an old rhythm rise from paving stones still slick with dew, a rhythm built from duty and piety and the stubborn habit of survival. You might struggle to endure what they once lived through. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it for you right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You follow the slope of the Palatine as darkness thins. At a ridge of grass and scattered stones, a small hut once stood with posts blackened by long fires. The people of the city guarded it as the house of a first king, the place where a shepherd's hands made a roof from reeds and will. The timbers appeared and vanished through centuries of rebuilding, glimpsed in layers of soil like a memory that refuses to be pinned in a single year. The hut on this hill lingers between story and soil, its shape never entirely settling. Yet its presence teaches the city how to remember beginnings. Bells answer each other across distance. They come from a sanctuary tucked behind fig trees, from a little altar near a crossroads where a candle fights the last of the night. At doorways, hands lift to the lares, the small guardian figures that receive the first crumbs and first words. Oil lamps are trimmed. A servant pours wine to the household spirits, a thin thread of purple on the threshold, while a child presses a palm to a cool figurine and whispers a plea for an easy day. The city's gods sit beside bowls and brooms and old sandals, their attention steady and domestic, a watch that never tires of ordinary rooms. You pass beneath the brittle lines left by cartwheels. Each groove writes a sentence about bakers and brickmakers, about market women balancing baskets, about brokers moving contracts with wax seals still moist. The forum waits with its columns gray in dawn, but the day's first choreography unfolds in the quiet streets. A seller of onions arranges his cords of green and white. A woman shakes a rug against the first beam of sunlight that reaches her window, dust turning like gold flakes that never fall. In the Subura, a rooster crows and a pot of lentils begins to steam, the scent earthy and hopeful. Above the city, aqueducts cross valleys on tiers of patient arches. Their steady fall of water measures distance better than milestones, a slope learned by hand and eye over long seasons. At the base of a slope, a fountain wakes. A boy cups his hands. As he drinks, he hears in the splash the confidence of stone and geometry, a promise that the city's thirst will be met. Romans who built these channels understood the value of a measured drop. In the days when Augustus counted the aqueducts as part of Rome's triumph, the flow made abundance feel daily, almost simple, even as it depended on invisible labor and quiet monitoring through the night. On the Aventine, a baker kneads dough in a rhythm older than law. His oven fires with almond wood. He dusts his board with flour and uses a sharp reed to carve a mark into each round, a sign that will speak for him when loaves lie in public baskets and magistrates inspect weight and quality. The year sometimes leans towards scarcity, and grain ships ride the swells from Alexandria with the empire's boldest hope. Today, the breeze is mild, and the baker trusts the river and the warehouses near the porticus of Aemilia. The daily dole will be tallied by officials with tablets smooth as calm water. A group of youths runs along the Tiber's path, the gravel crunching, their bodies alive with new strength. They carry leather balls, and their laughter touches the surface of the river in ripples. Nearby, an old veteran adjusts his belt and tells a story about a day when standards dipped in dust and rose again. His voice is slow and thick with sleep. yet it carries iron memory. He points with two fingers toward the campus martius, where, many mornings, drill patterns sketch geometry onto ground, reminding the city that order begins with what the feet learn to repeat. Inside a domus on the Celian, a door swings open and the atrium fills with pale light that falls through the compluvium like blessing. The shallow pool of the impluvium holds a thin sky and the first leaf that has decided to let go. Slaves sweep. A steward checks tablets. A patron prepares to greet clients who will recite practiced words of loyalty. The wax shines on the lararium in the corner, red and white and green against stucco that smells faintly of lime. A silver bowl of dates is placed on a low table. A scribble of stylus on wax echoes 100 other homes where business will rise from greetings like smoke rises from sweet resin. In an insula of the Esquiline, the day begins with a creak of stair and a murmur between neighbors. A woman unties a cord that holds a jug near a window for cooler air. A man with a scar on his chin straps on sandals that he repaired with a nail that does not match the leather, each patch proof that he refuses to surrender to wear. In the courtyard, a small fig tree holds dew in its leaves. The building groans like a ship at sea and sways almost imperceptibly, a reminder that wood and brick can be stubborn and fragile in the same breath. The upper floors feel the wind more than the ground. On the Capitoline, Geese once cried out in a night that threatened to break the city's spine. Their memory survives in a yearly rite, a careful walk in armor, a comic procession that hides steel beneath laughter. The steps look worn by triumphs and petitions. A magistrate passes by with lictors whose rods and axes bring the hush that public authority needs in a narrow street. He moves toward a day of hearing disputes, his mind already sifting voices. He will sit beneath a statue whose eyes do not blink, the marble face reading nothing and everything. You walk on, and the city shows you the first agreements of the day. Two men clasp wrists, their grip dry with flour and fine dust, and make a promise that a notary will burn into lines of wax. A mother knots a ribbon around a child's wrist, the dye faintly scented from the jar where it slept. A priest lifts a small dish of barley at a corner shrine. Somewhere behind a wall, a woman sings, not to a god, not to a man, but to the steadiness of morning itself. The sun climbs. The 7 hills offer their terraces like open hands. From the Janiculum across the river, a breeze crosses water and stone and finds your face. Rome has learned to welcome such wind and bind it to routine. The city trusts patterns. The city also listens for new footsteps. The boundaries between past and present feel thin here, as if the day steps out from a tapestry each dawn to live for a few hours in breathable air, and then returns to join the woven days of centuries. At the edge of the forum, a monumental calendar is carved into space and habit. Market days rise from its marks, court schedules unfold from its measured boxes, festivals drift forward with garlands and song. The year moves with these notes like a citizen walking a known street. Yet even the calendar bears traces of older ways. The division of time, the names of months, the balance between sacred and civic duties, these carry layers like plaster applied over frescoes that never truly fade. The city holds them all without strain. The light stains the stone with honey. The first true heat gathers in the cracks between paving blocks. You feel in your chest the reason why the people of this place love order and blessing. Ordered water, blessed thresholds, counted loaves, named days. The ordinary makes courage possible. A morning can teach a city how to face an empire's distances and a household's demands at once. And still the hut on the Palatine lingers, the reed roof moving slightly in the mind's breeze, never choosing between memory and artifact. It stands long enough for you to learn the shape of beginnings, and then dissolves back into the day. You step from the brightness of the street into the hush of a Roman doorway, and the city lowers its voice. The threshold stone is smooth from generations of souls, and a faint scent of wet lime and olive oil hangs in the cooler air within. Light falls through a square of sky and gathers in a shallow pool at your feet. The open roof above makes a clean frame for morning cloud and bird, and the water keeps the house listening, reflecting every shift of the day as it moves. This is a domus that carries its own weather. Each room opens off the atrium like petals from a calm center, and the pulse of household life begins here with brooms and pitchers and small greetings to the spirits that guard the door. Your eyes travel across painted walls, bands of red like warm clay, black grounds that hold thin temples and winding vines. Little theatrical masks peer from corners with a smile that stays kind at this hour. The plaster still whispers of wet brushes and careful hands. A mosaic dog invites caution with set paws and an alert gaze, not fierce, only dutiful. A bronze chest sits beneath a niche that glows with lamp soot. Everywhere are signs that Romans carry beauty into daily routine as deliberately as they carry water. A servant steps past with a basin. The sound of metal rings against the rim. Near the corner, a small altar brightens. Two guardian figures look toward the kitchen door where steam will soon rise. You cross the atrium and feel the slight shift underfoot where the marble inlay changes pattern. The tablinum lies ahead, a room that can open to the garden when weather is gentle. This is the place where letters are sealed and ledgers read, where the day's visitors will wait their turn to speak. The house arranges its dignity here without speaking it aloud. On a table lies a wax tablet, the marks fresh and firm, and a reed pen rests in a curve like a sleeping fish. Somewhere deeper in the house, a voice recites a memory task for a child, and another voice answers with laughter that shakes loose the last cobwebs of night. Beyond the tablinum, the light opens again. The peristyle wraps a small garden in columns that smell faintly of dust warmed by yesterday's sun. Laurel and myrtle hold droplets from a brief sprinkle at dawn. A fountain taps a simple measure that you feel in your ribs. Chickens cluck. A slave kneels to sweep petals from the path, so the mistress may step with clean sandals. The house breathes in this rectangle of green and stone, as if it were a second chest. Here dinners will stretch into the cool with low voices, and a bowl of figs in the middle of the table, while the moon polishes the shoulders of statues in the corners. Rooms gather around this calm, each with a duty. A cubiculum holds a bed that smells of cedar. A storeroom keeps grain in tall jars sealed with clay that carries the thumbprint of the one who closed it. The kitchen blackens its ceiling and teaches patience as pots give up their steam. All of it fits a plan that citizens understand, even when they sleep. The house is a map of order. The house is a boundary against the rush of carts and the shouting of boys and the sudden panic of a rumor. Inside the walls, life can be measured in soft things like lamp wicks and folded cloth. Yet not far from this cool geometry stands a different kind of home. You feel the street narrow and the sun press hard on brick. An insula collects lives in stacked wooden ribs and baked clay. Balconies lean like tired elbows. Stairs climb in turns that make strangers brush sleeves. Here the day is made from nearness. A mother pours water into a jug tied near a window for a breath of breeze. A porter dozes on a stool by the doorway and knows the names of people he cannot afford to greet with a bow. The building creaks in the first heat as if it were a ship setting out without a harbor master. Inside the insula, rooms are rooms because a curtain says they are. A pot sits on a little brazier. A rope holds laundry. A small shrine painted on plaster takes offerings that are often crumbs and a whispered promise of better work. A barrel by the stair carries sand and a bucket. People know why. The city remembers too well when flames unrolled like red cloth down alleys and bit into roofs. After a savage summer night when fire began near the circus and ate its way toward the hills, the rebuilding taught new lessons. Streets widened. Porticos appeared to break the wind that carries sparks. Limits were set on how high these stacked homes could climb against the light. The measure felt like mercy, disguised as law. You lean over a rail, and the smell of lentils stewing winds upward. Somewhere a lute pushes out a shy line and then stops, as if the player were listening to the room. Names pass on the stair, with greetings short to save breath. A boy runs up 3 flights with a basket of bread and gives his mother the small loaf that will be theirs. The crust crackles as it cools in the room's shade. News travels faster than smoke here. A patrician's nephew lost a case. A ship docked early with Sicilian grain. A neighbor found extra work scraping labels from reused amphorae. The building knows everything by noon and reveals nothing at night except a warm glow at the joints where shutters do not meet. Back at the domus, the doorposts wear tokens of protection. A thread of wool with a knot. A charm pressed flat and hung on a leather loop. The house is a citizen of the city, and like any citizen, it keeps a face for visitors. Clients will arrive soon to exchange the morning words that grease the day. Boys will bring tablets and leave with instructions. The cook will slip through with a bunch of leeks and a look that promises a stew to be remembered, even if the memory is only a quiet satisfaction stretched over bread. You touch the threshold and feel the temperature of stone that has learned to hold both heat and cool. You rise into the upper rooms where quiet deepens. A chest opens with a cedar sigh. Within lies a wedding veil, a sign of yesterday's vows folded beside a mirror of polished bronze that holds in its brown surface a face that is always half a mystery. A spindle waits for hands that will twist wool into a thread that could mend a tunic or bind a life to another with calm persistence. The house counts such work with the same care it counts coin. A woman will steer this counting without raising her voice, making the house prosper by attending to the linen and the ledgers with equal patience. Even here questions gather like dust motes in the sun. How many souls lived in one cramped room when a family rented the top floor that leans in the wind? How often did water find its way to a second story through lead pipes that a careful owner paid to repair? How many nights did a slave slip outside to sleep by a doorway because the kitchen's heat would not let his body cool? You sense that answers change by street and by season, by the humor of officials and the reach of a purse. The city keeps its totals close, but allows you to hear the rustle of possibilities. In both domus and insula, the same day spreads like a cloth. Loaves will be divided, lamps will be trimmed, small figures at shrines will receive a touch. A mother will hum the line of a lullaby in a stairwell that smells of mildew and fennel. A steward will chalk a schedule on a board that hangs near the back rooms. The house, whether wide and frescoed or narrow and patched, gives the people of Rome a place to finish the sentence that the street begins. You feel how walls do not only hold heat and silence, they also keep memory from thinning out. They teach the hand where to reach in the dark for the familiar shape of a key. The day leans forward. Somewhere a door closes with a firmness that means duty. Somewhere a shutter swings and shows a wedge of blue. The city's great spaces will demand voices soon, but houses have claimed the morning. In their courtyards and stairwells, the eternal city keeps its smaller promises. The water in the atrium pool blinks at the sky. The balcony plants tilt toward the sun. The stone under your palm feels steady enough to carry the weight of hour after hour without complaint. You follow the hush of the house out to the living arteries of the city, where water travels with a confidence learned from mountains. Far beyond the walls, channels begin as quiet lines scratched into hillsides. The fall so gentle it feels like an idea rather than a slope. Here in Rome, the aqueducts arrive as arches walking across valleys, stone on stone, a rhythm that your eyes can count but never tire of. You move beneath one of these sober giants as morning brightens its flanks. Courses of tufa and travertine, joints packed with the patience of mortar. A trickle you cannot see becomes a chorus you can hear at fountains, cisterns, bathhouses, and gardens, the city's pulse translated into sound. At a street basin, a bronze spout shaped like a lion's mouth releases a clear thread. You rinse your fingers and feel the chill that remembers upland springs. Children press their cups into the sparkling fall, and a mule flicks an ear while its driver wets the dust from his lips. A woman fills a clay amphora, tips it against her hip, and the public space becomes private again as she vanishes through a doorway. The water does not argue. It simply moves on to the next need. You think of the men who measure and inspect, of the official whose title is a promise, curator aquarum, who keeps the flow honest. In one season, a seasoned soldier named Frontinus will write to fix memory in lines. Sources, capacities, branches, thefts, repairs. The city will hold that book the way a careful household holds a key. You walk with the flow toward the mills where power tutors grain. On the Janiculum Hill, water drops through channels to turn wheels stacked like shields. Stones whisper in long rotations. Wheat becomes meal as if the city were quietly thinking itself into bread. Bags are carried down to bakeries where paddle and oven wait. The heat has a caramel edge from sweepings and chaff. Men dusted white as marble lift loaves shaped by habit, rounds and flatbreads, stamped with marks that identify each shop and master. Magistrates will weigh those loaves. A cheat is not a small sin when the city leans on measured hunger. Across the river, a row of warehouses keeps a hush like a chapel. Their mouths open toward the Tiber, and the air tastes of rope, damp planks, and salt. Grain ships have crawled up from the sea with bellies full, their hulls creaking from Alexandria's swells and Sicilian winds. Farther out, beyond the river's bend, a new harbor gathers the sea into law. Piers, lighthouse, breakwater, and beyond that later a basin cut by a prince who loves hexagons as much as justice. There, in the calm of Portus, the empire's long gamble on weather ends most days in relief rather than prayer. Porters move like steady tides down gangplanks, the grain tally scratched on tablets that shine in the morning. You taste the day's bread in your mind before it touches your tongue. The first bite is humility and gratitude at once. A city can forget gratitude and live, but it cannot forget grain. Long ago, the state learned to answer this hunger with systems steady enough to calm a restless crowd. An allotment waits for citizens in lines that teach patience. A clerk calls names, a measure dips into a basket, a nod settles a small account between empire and belly. The number of those who step forward will swell and shrink with time, and the city will adjust like a sailor trimming a sail. But the idea that a capital's peace is held partly in a granary will outlast marble. Olive oil walks into Rome in clay shoes. Amphorae from the western provinces arrive with bellies round and necks long, sealed with wax and stamped with tidy letters. A cooper knocks his knuckles against one to test soundness. A scribe records a mark that speaks of far groves silvering in Andalusian wind. The oil pours like a slow answer to a calm question. Gold that remembers sun, leaf, and stone. It finds lamps and kitchens, shoulders and wooden spoons, breads and prayer. In kitchens you hear the whisper of onions meeting oil, the sweetness of garlic traveling the length of a lane. The city eats with this glow, lights with it, anoints with it. Broken amphorae pile up by a river bend until they shape a hill all their own, shards layered like calendars of appetite. Each stamp a date no one needs to read to understand. You sit on a low step and watch a baker mark his loaves with a reed. The sign is small, but it makes the bread speak. This weight, this hand, this oven. A boy waits with a coin warmed by his fist. A woman buys a round for a neighbor who gave her vinegar last week when hers ran thin. A soldier takes two and tucks them into his bag as neatly as he folds a cloak. When the oven door opens, a wave of heat and yeast and wood smoke puts words on the day that no magistrate can erase. Enough. Today, there is enough. The city seasons its enough with sauces that travel farther than most men. A fish ferment lives in little ceramic flasks stamped with names from shores you have never seen. A drop is a door opening. A plate of cabbage becomes a field in sunlight. A piece of goat becomes a story with a longer tale. At a stall, you watch a cook drizzle a thin line of salted amber over boiled beans, then smash them to a paste, then spread that paste on hot bread until the bread sighs. A leaf of lovage, a sprinkle of ground pepper, and the day agrees with itself. Yet certainties thin at their edges. Water meets its blessings unequally. A pipe stops at one corner, and a boy must carry buckets farther than he has strength. A roof cistern leaks and leaves a chalk line on a wall. In hot months, the flow slows and tensions rise like heat shimmer. Far away, a storm can brew where the Tiber swallows what men have placed, and the city will taste silt when it prefers snowmelt. You sense how Rome lives by adjustments. A valve opened at dusk, a patrol sent to stop illegal taps, a repair crew called before dawn with lead sheets and tools that ring against stone like small bells. A priest passes with a basket and a slow stride. In it lies a pinch of sacred meal mixed with salt, the old recipe that marries field and altar. Vestal hands once guarded that mixture, as if the city's lungs depended on it. Perhaps they did. You watch as the priest pauses at a wayside shrine and lifts a finger of flour to the lip, leaving a pale crescent like the first moon. The gesture is small, but it gathers the field into the street and binds the unseen to the stomach. You notice a potter turning a wheel near his kiln. He shapes little lamps and stores them like brown moons on a shelf. One bears the relief of a dolphin. Another shows a sheaf of grain bound with a ribbon. People will buy these to bring night into compliance, and the oil that fills them will be the same gold that softens greens and fish and chickpeas. You realize how one harvest becomes many comforts: flame, flavor, sheen on wood, slip for baking dishes, how the city reuses a single blessing until it shines with meanings beyond hunger. Not every meaning settles easily. The taste of water drawn through lead channels prompts murmurs in some quarters. The dull gleam of pipes is a convenience, a marvel, a question. People shrug and drink. Others prefer the fountain where stone lets the water breathe. Numbers rise when the dole is generous. Did the lists hold 150,000 names, or do they swell closer to 300,000 when the wind of policy shifts? Inland storms can break sea journeys into wreckage. A hungry week can turn a crowd volatile. You feel in these unsettled edges how management of bread and water is as much an art as engineering. By midday, the market beds down in the heat, stalls quieting under woven shade. A girl cradles a loaf against her chest and walks in the slow way that keeps crust from cracking. A cook skims a pot and tastes with a wooden spoon, nodding to a memory of his mother's hand doing the same motion in a different kitchen long ago. Clerks tally measures, drivers rest animals, and the aqueducts, those high, patient lines do not tire. Their shadows pivot on fields and stone, and Rome leans its day on their dependable penumbra. When you lift a last cup of water to your lips, it is not only thirst that is satisfied. The cup holds the order of distances mastered and weights respected, of ships made honest by lighthouses and inspectors, of mills that turn while the baker sleeps, of oil pressed in provinces and poured into lamps that keep letters legible at dusk. Bread, oil, water, the trinity of the ordinary. The city returns to these three as to a prayer spoken softly morning and evening, until the words no longer need to be said to be believed. You step into the swell of voices where Rome buys its day. The forum waits like a broad mouth that speaks with many tongues, and the sound rises in layers that never quite resolve. Bronze clinks against stone as stalls wake. A woman folds back a canvas awning so the morning can enter. The smell of crushed herbs and warm wool, of brine and old vinegar, of figs that have begun to soften at the stem, climbs the colonnades and settles under the carved eaves. Your feet find a rhythm beside ruts polished by years of cartwheels, and the city opens its palm to show what it needs and what it dreams it needs. Tabernae line the edge like little theaters with props ready. Shutters slide into grooves. Counters are wiped with a wet twist of cloth. A wine cellar thumps a clay jug and smiles at the sound it gives back. On a wooden shelf sit cups blackened by travel and stories. Next door, a cloth dealer lifts a bolt of undyed wool. The fabric rises like a pale river and then falls in soft waves. He pulls out a ribbon of color and shows how the purple deepens when the light turns. Mercury stands in a niche above him with a little purse and winged hat, the god's tiny eyes looking as if they understand margins and luck. Near the center, money moves. Argentarii set out their tables, and the silver begins to ring. Scales blink in the light, their pans catching little arcs of sun. Coins travel across palms that have learned to weigh by feel first and by metal second. A boy holds a handful of sestertii that smell faintly of the leather bag that carried them. He watches as a changer tests the bite of a denarius against the edge of a weight, then nods and scratches a mark on a wax tablet. The lines look like reeds along a slow river, yet they decide dinners and dowries. Aedils stroll with attendants, their gaze trained to see false bottoms and hollow measures, the guardians of honesty in the daily exchange. At a corner where fishmongers shout in lean voices, baskets shine with scales that still hold moonlight. A woman lifts a sardine by the tail and presses the flesh with her thumb. She nods and drops it into her pot like a pebble. A jar of fermented sauce waits beside her, a perfume of sea and thyme that will make the smallest catch feel like a feast. She sniffs a leaf of celery and smiles at the memory of a recipe learned in a kitchen where the ceiling was black and the laughter bright. A man hollers that his mackerel swam yesterday under a friendly wind. The lie is kind and harmless. The day permits it because the knife is sharp and the price is fair. Spice sellers hold court with gentler hands. They break a cinnamon stick so the breath of distant groves can cross the stall. They let a few peppercorns roll across a palm. The tiny spheres carry the heat of paths that run beyond the desert's blue edge. A small scale measures saffron threads with almost religious care. A passerby leans in to breathe a pinch of cumin and closes his eyes so he can travel without moving. The jars are marked with neat letters. Some speak of islands where the rain falls like warm lace. Some speak of Syrian glass that catches light as if it were water you could pour and keep. Weights and measures keep the chorus clean. At the forum's edge, a stone block bears a row of official cavities. A man sets his bronze cup into one and nods at the snug fit. The city keeps a memory of correct volume in rock, so that a trader's promise does not depend only on his smile. A wine shop owner draws off a measure with a steady hand. The stream narrows when he lifts the plug, then widens when he relaxes. He pauses at the mark that experience has burned into the wrist. He hands the jar back with a nod that carries both pride and relief. Today, the measure holds. Today, no one calls for a magistrate. You ease toward the Argoletum, where the road narrows and the noise quickens. Here, the Subura begins, restless and alive, a neighborhood that stitches laughter to worry and perfumes to soot. Cobbler stalls show rows of sandals with straps that promise long miles. A barber's chair gathers men who pretend they have time to waste. He lifts his razor like a thin moon, and the scrape sounds like silk being folded. A bookseller lays out fresh copies of verses, still damp from the pressboard. He reads a line aloud to a student, and the boy smiles with a blush that admits the line will live in his head all day. Heat grows between buildings. Shadows reach down to touch shoulders and cool them. A shout interrupts the flow. Two men argue over a cracked amphora, the clay singing a dull note when struck. They point at the thin ring where glaze yielded to heat. Adels arrive with faces like shutters closed against rain. They listen, lift the jar, and rap knuckles on it twice. A fine is set. The trader's shoulders drop. The buyer gets a new jar that shines like a fresh moon. A list on a whitened board records the decision, and the market breathes again. In this place, law does not stand far away in marble halls. It moves among shoppers and sellers and chooses its tone to match the street. A baker's boy runs through with a stack of flatbreads balanced on a board. He calls out not to warn, but to share the smell that follows him. Honey, smoke, wheat, and the faint edge of ash, a scent that can soften tempers. The crowd eases its shoulders and lets him pass. Nearby, a tinker shows how a dent vanishes beneath a heated iron and a careful twist. His bag holds small miracles made from wire and patience. He takes a cup that has seen too much and sends it back into service with a sigh of pride that he tries to hide. In the shade of a basilica, deals grow taller than the men who make them. Land is spoken of as if it were a polite animal that can be guided by words. Ships are imagined into being, and their cargo booked as if the sea were a slave. A scribe records an agreement that will send a load of marble upriver, the tablets warm under his moving hand. The basilica cools tempers and smooths grammar. Voices drop to a murmur that makes listeners lean closer. The city believes that stone can teach behavior, and today the lesson works. Not all stories here are bright. A girl watches the silk seller's stall with a gaze that knows she cannot touch what she loves. A man with careful fingers moves too close to a purse and fades when the owner turns. A widow counts coins twice and comes up one short each time. Somewhere a runner brings the first rumor of a rise in grain price, and the air tightens a little. Rome knows how to swallow such moments with grace, but a stray wind can lift them and carry them farther than anyone intends. The vigil of the market belongs to buyers and sellers, and also to quiet men who track the tremor in a crowd. You return to the forum's heart, where statues watch with the patience of stone. Pigeons arrange themselves along the heads of statesmen and generals who greeted markets long before this morning. A seller of garlands fixes fresh laurel into a ring that will circle a god's jaw by evening. Children play a game with knucklebones and invent rules as they go. A storyteller begins a tale about a man who outwitted a dishonest wait and ended with a feast. Laughter rolls like cloth unspooled from a bolt. The tale brightens the air, even as it hints that the line between shrewdness and sin is walked every day on these stones. You wonder about the market's deeper facts that refuse to stand still. How fully did women hold the stalls that fed whole streets when husbands marched with legions? How far did pepper travel in the hands of middlemen whose names no receipt kept? How much did the Subura deserve its sharp reputation when every street can be both generous and cruel within a single hour? The city gives you noise and scent and touch and lets the ledger of certainty stay thin. By late morning, the sun makes bright sheets across the paving blocks. Vendors wet the ground to hold back dust. A boy naps under a table, mouth open, palms still red from counting copper. A flute tries a simple tune near the steps and chooses to repeat the part that makes a lemon seller sway. The markets inhale and exhale, and Rome keeps time by their breathing. You walk through the sound as if it were a river. When you step out on the other side, the air feels suddenly wide, and you carry the music of buying and selling in your clothes like a spice that will not wash out. You walk where work begins before the sun decides its color, and Rome shows the hands that hold it together. A fuller unlatches his shop door, and the smell of soaked cloth and sharp ammonia lifts into the lane. He folds his tunic to the knee and steps into a vat with a tread learned from his father, lifting and pressing and turning bundles of wool until grease loosens and dye will take. Clay jars line the wall like a sleepy battalion. A boy stirs one with a paddle and watches a purple cloud rise like a bruise and then settle. Wet cloth slaps against a stone lip. In the corner, a small altar carries a sprig of laurel and a thumb of fat in a dish, a quiet promise that color will hold. A dyer greets the morning in a yard behind the shop. The stones are stained with many seasons of blue and red. He lifts a basket from a kettle and the steam tastes of copper and vinegar on your tongue. He turns the cloth so air can decide the final shade. The rope creaks. A blackbird lands on the wall and tilts its head. The dyer smiles at the omen because work has its own religion, built from signs that no temple calendar records. In a niche by the door, a tiny winged phallus glares at misfortune, a city charm with a grin as old as worry itself. You follow the street toward the river where the cargo speaks in a lower voice. Porters hunch under amphorae and move in a line as steady as a psalm. The clay sings when jars touch. Sacharii ease loads onto mats and straighten to listen for instructions that come in single words. Lift, wait, go. A foreman marks a tally on a board with chalk that squeaks. Nearby, a stone block shows a groove worn by ropes that have kept the same course for years. The ropes shine from many palms. At the wharf, a gangplank thuds. Men in short tunics pass baskets up from a hold that smells of cumin and seaweed and oil. Somewhere, a supervisor from the Guild of Shippers murmurs thanks to a river god and to a prince whose harbor made storms less cruel. Across the yard, a cooper taps a stave and hears if it will seat without complaint. He leans close to smell the wood. His mallet teaches the hoop to obey. New barrels stand like short soldiers with open mouths. The cooper rubs his palm over the rim of one and feels the level as if it were a forehead checking for fever. A scribble on the side announces the workshop, the season, the master. The city will read those marks long after the barrel lies in pieces. A cart waits with wheels that groan a little at each turn. The driver kneels to loop a leather thong around a pin, and the sound it makes is as small and right as a swallow's note. Down a quieter lane, a potter kicks his wheel and clay climbs under his thumbs. Lamps line his shelves with little eyes waiting for oil. He trims the spouts with a wet knife that shines for a second and then goes dull. A girl tests a warm lamp and smiles at the dolphin swimming across its face. She leaves a coin and the potter slips it into a purse where it clinks softly against the day's other small victories. In the kiln yard, a pile of broken shards gathers at the corner like a red hill that grows while no one watches. Each shard keeps a memory of heat and shape and hands that tried. You turn toward the brick fields outside the walls where earth becomes architecture. Women and men press clay into molds and lift the wet forms onto racks that make shadows like harp strings. Stamps repeat names in neat lines. A faglina of a noble house. A yard known for straight edges and even firing. The stamps tell who owns the earth and who owes the earth an honest effort. In a season of rebuilding, the kilns glow from dusk to dawn. Carts carry the new rectangles into the city like loaves taken to an oven. Walls rise with a rhythm that feels musical. A mason whispers a fragment of verse to keep his line true. Within the city, a carpenter measures a lintel with a cord dyed red and marks a cut with a nick of charcoal. Sawdust lifts and floats in shafts of light. He speaks to wood the way a physician speaks to bone, with respect and insistence. His apprentice holds the far end and breathes when the master breathes. A second man fits pegs made from heartwood and taps them until the joint forgets it was once two parts. The humming that runs through the beam when the fit settles becomes part of the afternoon's music. In the courtyard, a client watches and pretends not to smile, because a door that swings cleanly is a small crown for any house. At a folding table in a shaded corner, a scribe lays out his tools. The reed pen is cut at an angle and kisses the ink like a bird at a fountain. He warms his fingers, flexes them, and opens a roll that holds a neat grid of accounts. A client dictates a letter in phrases that seem to know their own weight. The scribe nods at each period as if it were a gate closed with care. He adds a second copy on a wax tablet for the household file and sprinkles a little dust to settle the wet ink on the papyrus. He writes names as if names were anchors. Today, the letters move faster than the carts because a runner knows the back lanes by heart. Not far away, the Pholonica sings its own chorus. Men with thick calves tread cloth in rhythm. Others stretch wet tunics on frames and brush them with fuller's earth until nap rises soft and even. A boy with nimble fingers patches a tear so neatly the fabric forgets it ever failed. On a shelf, a set of bronze tokens waits for customers, each marked with a number, so garments find their owners again. The foreman hangs a wreath above the door for a festival that will pass down the street tomorrow with pipes and a banner. Work pauses to watch when the banner comes. It always does. You pause at a tiny shrine at a crossroads where the layers of the neighborhood receive crumbs and praise. Two old men from a collegium sweep the platform and set fresh garlands on the posts. They wear simple caps that look like worn clouds. Freedmen honor that cap because it speaks of the day a man rose from property to citizen. In the evening, the guild will meet to share wine, to settle fees, to elect a warden with a name that fits well in the mouth. The gathering will be half solemn and half like a family dinner. Some days the state smiles on such unions. Some days it narrows its eyes and remembers how crowds can turn. Rules change with emperors. The need for fellowship does not change. Numbers keep whispering beneath the street sounds. How many of the hands you pass belong to the enslaved whose labor fuels the city's ease? How many of those hands will one day wear the cap and take a new name at dawn? How often do wages keep faith with bread and oil when storms make ships late? The ledgers that survive cannot hold every crumb of the truth. The workday keeps parts of itself unrecorded, like a tune that singers know but never write. Afternoon leans on shoulders. In a metalworker's stall, sparks pop like tiny stars and fall to sleep on the floor. He lifts a new hinge and watches how it swings on its pin with quiet satisfaction. The hinge will live in a door you will never see again, yet it will move many times each day, like a modest miracle. Nearby, a tanner scrapes a hide with slow strokes that could be mistaken for prayer. The scent is fierce and necessary. Leather laces will bind sandals that will climb every stair in the city. When the hour begins to thin, wages pass from hand to hand. A foreman counts slowly and touches each coin to the palm of the worker who earned it, as if sealing a pact. A woman knots her shawl and keeps her pay close to the skin. A boy tucks his small share into a hidden pocket and decides he will taste honeyed nuts on the way home. The city steps away from labor without ever fully leaving it. Tools are stowed, sweepings go into baskets. A last rag is wrung and hung to dry. You feel how the eternal city depends on motions that are small and repeated until they become character. The press of a seal, the setting of a brick, the pause of a pen at the end of a line. Work of many hands makes a single day stand upright. Work of many hands also leaves mysteries behind. The numbers of those hands, the balance between guild and law, the quiet pride that never asked for marble to remember it. The lamps will soon be lit by oil that rode up the river, and in their light, the tools will rest like animals sleeping in their stalls until morning calls them by name again. You listen to Rome move. It begins as a hush, a brushing of sandals over dust, then becomes a low murmur of wheels testing stone, iron rims tapping the day into even measures. You step into a street where paving blocks lie like a river frozen into order. The crown raised in the center so rain runs toward the gutters, the joints packed tight enough that weeds bow to the will of the city. At the corners, stepping stones lift your feet above yesterday's wash, and carts pause so you may cross. The street is a lesson in compromise. Water must drain, feet must pass, axles must not snap. Rome teaches each element to keep its place. A cart appears, the axle whining until the driver coaxes it quiet with grease that smells of tallow and thyme. Two mules tilt their ears, the brass on their harnesses glinting. The driver raises a hand and the crowd narrows for him. Oak sides carry amphorae cushioned with rope, their mouths sealed with wax, and marked with tidy letters that say which estate tended which grove. The wheels settle into ruts carved by years of the same decisions, each rut a sentence written by repetition. You watch the cart vanish under a lattice of shade thrown by balconies, the sound softening as if the city were swallowing its own motion. Above the forum's north side stands a memory hammered into metal, a golden point that promised that all distances begin here. You pass the place where that milestone once gathered the empire into a single idea. The measure is simple and audacious at once, miles counted from a city that believes itself the heart. Couriers carry that belief on bronze tablets that grant them passage, their horses sweating lightly as they swap at stations strung like beads along the roads. Mansion is to sleep, mutation is to change mounts, a chain of hospitality enforced by law and habit. The cursus publicus breathes through these intervals, and letters ride faster than storms. You follow a lane outward until it stretches into a certainty, great blocks laid so true that your foot forgets doubt. The road lifts on an embankment above marsh, slips into a cutting where rock peeled back for passage, then strides over a valley on arches that look like thought made visible. A name travels along the stone. Appia. Aediles call it the Queen of Roads, and your steps hear why. Long ago, in a year when consuls saluted a man named Appius Claudius, crews set the first slabs in a line that ran south like a vow. Centuries will pass, emperors will speak, borders will bend, and this surface will still say north and south with a voice you cannot mistake. Milestones mark the day like patient shepherds. Each tells you how far you have come and how far until the next place where bread and water wait. Some bear the names of rulers who paid to mend the surface after floods, after winter heave, after neglect pretended to be poverty. You trail your fingers over one and feel the shallow letters like old scars. A man with a staff reads a name aloud with respect. To maintain a road is a quiet kind of war. The enemy is time and weather and wheels that never rest, and the victory is a cart that does not break. Closer to the city, rules shape movement the way banks shape a stream. By day, heavy carts often keep to the edges or wait in yards until evening grants them the right to enter, a custom born when emperors grew tired of clamor and crush. Litters glide where wheels must pause, their bearers counting steps in murmured rhythms, their poles creaking softly as silk cushions pass under carved lintels. A magistrate's chair travels with a halo of silence. A vendor's tray floats on a strap over a shoulder and invites a different kind of attention, the cracking of nuts and the kiss of honey soothing the teeth of hours. Your eyes catch the conversation between foot and stone, the way soldiers' caliga bite the surface with square hobnails that leave small constellations, the way children's sandals scuff and then skip when they find a seam to play with. A dog pads in confident zigzags, mapping sense that your dull human nose cannot hold. The street levels strangers into comradeship for a moment. Everyone watches for the same puddles, the same loose stone, the same sudden swerve of a cart whose driver misjudged a corner. The choreography is exact without a master of ceremonies. It has been rehearsed since the first wheel rolled between house walls. At an arch where two roads part, a stone pillar is pocked with small chips where men test blades or idly scrape while they wait for business to begin. Next to it, a notice announces repairs up ahead and invites citizens to praise the aedile whose budget has been persuaded into cooperation. A labor crew sits in the shade, their picks stacked like spears. They drink water that remembers snow and talk about the best quarries. Basalt answers in one tone, limestone in another. You can hear the difference through the haft if you know how to listen. Beyond the gate, a convoy gathers at first dusk when the band relaxes and wheels may enter the capital's throat. Torches lift and wagons creak forward like an oared ship. Drivers call to animals with words that are half names and half spells. The rims catch light and draw rings on the road. Somewhere a cart breaks a pin, and men kneel in a knot to mend it. Leather lacing passing from hand to hand in practiced order. The road endures this pressure with a kind of dignity. It gives back what it must, and no more. You think of the messengers who eat distance for a living. They carry tablets stamped with seals like small moons. A stable boy takes a hot horse and offers a fresh one in a swing of reins that wastes no breath. Bread passes from old hand to young without coin when the symbol of the state glitters on a belt. The journey that would take you 4 days takes the message 1.5, wind permitting. The empire's arguments travel this way. Its love letters, too, its orders, its pardons, its second thoughts sealed before sleep. Mysteries travel with them and linger at mileposts. Did the counts of miles always begin at the same golden point? Or did different ages insist on their own centers for their own reasons? How often did a wagon bribe its way past a barred hour, the night hearing coins sing softer than law? Which exact ruts on the Appian hold the imprint of a returning legion, and which carry only wine and hopes to market? The stones keep their secrets under dust and hoof polish. Sometimes rain washes a hint into view, and then closes the book again. Back within the city, you notice how alleys carry whispers while the great roads carry declarations. A broom sweeps a threshold, sending yesterday's grit toward the gutter. The cloaca, older than poems, draws the thin cloud of water under grates and out toward the river. The street smells briefly of spikenard where a woman passed, then returns to its usual recipe of bread and olive and warm animal. The world narrows to the size of a footfall and widens again to the span of a march. Children chase one another in a circle plotted by paving seams, their squeals bouncing off walls, pure and short-lived and entirely right. By evening, the sound lowers and softens as if the city were drawing a blanket over its knees. A mule's bell ticks like a patient clock. The last litter slips away into a courtyard that knows how to close its mouth. A cart of kindling rattles toward a bathhouse door where fires will burn the night into steam. You stand still long enough to feel the day settle inside the stones. Movement pauses without stopping. The roads will keep their vigil, counting heartbeats with the slow pulse of cooling iron. The eternal city sleeps in the certainty that tomorrow will draw the same lines and ask the same obedience. You walk one more length of paved thought, tracing with your feet an argument older than you. Build straight when you can, bend when you must, lift when the marsh threatens, drain when the rain insists, measure, mark, mend. Behind you, your footprints shine for a moment, where water found the last light and then vanish, absorbed into the long sum that roads and carts and footsteps keep for Rome. You arrive at a doorway where warm air carries cumin, honey, and the faint sea breath of sauce, and Rome invites you to table. A slave with quiet hands pours water over your fingers into a shallow basin, the stream thin and silvery in the lamplight. Another shakes out a linen cloth soft as worn snow. The room glows with a patient gold, lamps trimmed, bronze catching points of fire, a bowl of dates sunk into a wreath of bay. The triclinium draws your eye, its 3 couches forming a U around a low table with legs shaped like lion paws. Cushions remember other evenings. The rules here are old and relaxed at once. The night will move by courses the way a hymn moves by stanzas. You take your place according to the grammar of rank. The central couch claims the weight of honor. The leftmost, nearest the door, seats those who watch the service with a gentle vigilance. The rightmost gathers the familiar and the favored. Men recline on the left elbow so the right hand stays free. Women often sit, though fashion in some houses allows them to recline with a grace that reads the same line and gives it a different melody. A steward lifts a hand and the room quiets. A libation wets the floor at the corner shrine, a breath of wine for the lares so the evening walks safely. Then the first tray arrives like a modest trumpet. This is the gustatio, a prelude that persuades the tongue to open. Eggs with pinches of pepper. Olives scored so oil can enter. Little lettuces shining with a thread of honeyed vinegar. Anchovies arranged on a plate like a palmful of silver moons. A dish of beans mashed smooth with herbs, and a drizzle of that fermented magic that makes sea and time into flavor. You lift a piece of bread and taste the edge of lovage and the low hum of fish salt, the way a shoreline hums behind conversation. A carver, scissor, traces theatrical lines through a roast bird so each slice falls obediently where it was told to fall. He moves with a solemn joy that is half priest, half artisan. Wine leans into the talk. It has been cooled in a snow jar or warmed at the hearth depending on the season, and it will never come to you raw. Water meets it in a mixing bowl patterned with ivy, 2 parts, 3 parts, sometimes more, the ratio decided by the host's mood and tomorrow's obligations. A boy dips a ladle and fills small cups with steady wrists. Falernian bears itself like a veteran whose scars make it handsomer. Sabine wine prefers to stay modest and clean. A clink of cups answers a proverb about health that needs no explaining. Someone leaves a sip for the household gods with an ease that turns piety into courtesy. Outside this well-set room, the city eats differently. In an insula, a pot of barley porridge thickens with leeks, and a splash of oil turns it friendly. The day's prandium is often no more than a heel of bread, a wedge of cheese, a fig shared on a stair. Ientaculum for many is a quick bite, never enough to slow the hands that must work. Yet even the simplest table keeps its own etiquette. The best morsel saved for a child, the end crust left for a neighbor who knocks later, a sprinkle of salt that makes a humble bowl shine. Rome's mouths learn the same prayers in different rooms. Back in the triclinium, the prima mensa arrives with a confidence that softens spines. Boar dusted with coriander, kid glazed with honey and vinegar. A platter where cabbage sits beside a bowl of chickpeas, the color of warm sand. The sauce binds the room together, garum or liquamen, measured with respect, because a drop too much can turn chatter to complaint. You taste pepper, brought over blue distances, and you know it traveled in sacks guarded by men whose sandals learned the same ruts your feet traced this morning. Bread moves clockwise. A slave watches and replaces slices before absence becomes need. A murmur rises around the freshness of oysters, around the sweet fat bite of dormice rolled in poppy and dipped in honey, around a dish where mullet blushes in a bath of wine. A platter of greens cools the heat. Mallows, endive, tender celery that tastes of river shade. The host nods when a guest praises the balance of sour and sweet. He nods again when another admires the restraint. Sumptuary laws once tried to curb such evenings. The lex faunia and quiet cousins of its kind taught limits to guests and courses in anxious decades before empire. Yet habit outlived statutes, and fashion learned how to honor modesty while kissing luxury behind the curtain. Etiquette folds itself into gestures that repeat until they become thoughtless grace. You wipe your fingers on a mappa and lay it on your lap with the seal facing inward. You take small bites, never biting into fruit when a knife can spare the eyes of company. You accept what the carver grants and refuse by placing a hand gently over the plate, palm down, no words. Conversation rises like a tapestry, a thread of theater, a story about a provincial villa, a brief recitation of new verses that mention a storm and a girl with a lamp. A clever host keeps voices balanced like cups. No one drinks alone, no one speaks too long, and laughter lands where it will not bruise. Between bites, you hear the city's cookbook humming under the talk. A name passes like a rumor. Apicius, to some a patron saint of appetites, to others a caution with a generous hand for recipes. The dishes that bear his shadow are bold without cruelty. Pepper where you expect mint, dates in a sauce that pretends to be savory until the last heartbeat. You taste a stew where fish and herbs and wine lean on one another, and understand how an empire devours distance not only with roads, but with sauces. Service is a choreography devoted to invisibility. A boy watches the lamp wicks and pinches ash before it falls. Another refills cups before hands grow light. A girl moves along the foot of the couches with steps that match the room's heartbeat, gathering bones and crumbs, replacing bowls, steady as a metronome the eye barely sees. A platter returns to the kitchen with one gilded fig untouched because a superstition insists the table must never finish itself. The superstition has many explanations. The habit needs none. A second table seems to open when the secunda mensa arrives. Fruit. Soft cheese scented with thyme. Nuts browned at the edge of sweet. A dish of pears poached in wine that carries cinnamon like a memory. Honey finds every surface that will welcome it. Even talk softens here. The room turns towards small stories and kinder judgments. Dice rattle in a corner, more for music than for wagers. Someone hums a line from a play as if to invite masks without summoning them. Beneath the comfort, the city keeps its riddles. How often did the poor taste beef, except in dreams and festivals? How faithfully did the lists of the dole match mouths at stairwells 3 flights up? How far did women steer the seasonings when the guest list suggested politics in disguise? Some houses will insist on chairs rather than couches in later years, the old habit bending to new modesties. Some will never abandon the elbow and cushion. A myth of vomitoria will drift through centuries misapplied to dinners it never knew. while the true word belongs to the doors of an amphitheater, where crowds spill like water. The table lets errors pass and holds the flavor. Night thickens. A last cup glows with a little honey and a curl of orange peel. The host lifts a small figure of a god no larger than a fist and smiles the way a father smiles at a threshold. A guest leaves a parting bite on his plate for luck. Another tucks a date into his pouch for a child at home. Outside, a woman on a stair breaks a round of bread and shares it with a neighbor whose pot failed. Inside, couches sigh with the soft exhale of settling cushions. The etiquette of Rome is less about rule than about rhythm, less about display than about the grace of not hurrying the hand that feeds. You walk in the cooler court where the fountain keeps its syllables steady. The tongue remembers pepper and salt and sweetness. The hand remembers the weight of the cup. The mind remembers a small crescent of wine offered at the threshold, and the way silence followed it like a prayer completed. The night takes these memories and holds them without asking for more. You step from the street's grit into a vestibule fragrant with resin and warm stone, and the city teaches you a slower breath. A clerk takes your coin and nods toward a hall where light falls through high windows like calm water. The floor cools your feet, a mosaic of green vines and little dolphins that seem to swim when the eye moves. Voices drop to a murmur as if the room itself asked for courtesy. You pass a shrine with a small wreath and a bowl for first offerings, then hand your clothes to an attendant who ties them into a neat bundle and fixes a token to it with practiced fingers. The bathhouse receives your day the way a harbor receives ships, collecting noise and heat and sending them out again, tuned to a friendlier scale. The frigidarium waits first, a room of broad light and pale echoes. Columns stand with the patience of trees. Pools lie flat as mirrors, their surfaces disturbed only by the small sound of an arm cutting a line. You lower yourself and feel the world sharpen and then clarify. The skin tightens, the mind steadies. Water lifts along the chest and leaves a clean taste on the tongue. Men talk with shoulders and eyebrows rather than voices here. A boy dares a deep plunge and comes up with a grin he cannot restrain. Somewhere high above, glass winks. The cold is not a test. It is a key that turns the next door without creaking. You walk into the tepidarium and the air softens. Warmth wraps the muscles like linen. Marble benches hold bodies that have learned to relax without slackness. Attendants move with little jars of scented oil, their steps matching the room's low rhythm. A masseur's thumbs find knots and persuade them away. The ceiling curves like a calm sky and brings the whispers back to you in gentler versions. Here trades are planned, small quarrels patched, poems rehearsed under breath. A barber leans over a client, blade bright as a new moon, and the scrape is tender rather than sharp. You feel the city make agreements without tablets, the kind that stand because hands remember them. Beyond a bronze door, the caldarium breathes like a sleeping animal. Moist heat presses clothes, scented with laurel and the faint tang of mineral. You see the order that keeps the warmth faithful. Hypocaust pillars hold the floor a hand's breadth above a crawl of fire and smoke. Flues run through walls. Laborers feed the furnaces with wood that arrives in carts before dawn. You pass your palm near the stone and feel the glow that rose from the stoker's shoulders. A great circular bath steams at the center, rim smooth under your fingers. You lower yourself until the body forgets its edges. A strigil scrapes the skin clean after oil, pulling away grit and tiredness into a film that vanishes in the water with a flick. Someone sighs as if he had set down a great weight. The sigh is a chorus here, rising and falling, never loud. In the larger complexes, corridors multiply like nerves. One day you cross into a place where walls stretch into grandeur, vaults soar. The baths of Caracalla gather citizens under a roof that could contain a weather of its own, the 3rd century confidence of an empire turned into architecture. Gardens open with clipped hedges and shady walks. A library room waits with shelves and a quiet that holds the fingers still. Statues glance down from niches and make polite company for the naked. Everywhere, attendants know the routes, and you let yourself be guided without losing the feeling that you have chosen every step. You linger in the palestra where bodies learn to be both soft and strong. Men toss a heavy ball and catch with a thud that satisfies something ancient. Others shadow fence with wooden swords that whistle in short arcs. A rope hangs from a beam and carries the tail of hands that climbed before yours. Chalk dust follows effort. An old soldier corrects a younger man's stance with 2 words and a touch that turns awkward into efficient. The exercise is not a contest, so much as a conversation held in the language of joints and breath. Sweat reads the skin like ink. The next room promises to translate that script into ease. Water and heat bring conversation to a better pitch. In a side chamber, a philosopher smooths his beard and explains a line about virtue in a tone meant for neighbors rather than disciples. A baker answers with a remark about the patience that dough requires. The philosopher nods because the image is right. A jurist quotes a clause that will hold even if a magistrate wakes in a bad mood. A farmer visiting from the suburbs tells how olives listen to rain. Ideas travel farther here than along the streets, because the body, warmed and calmed, lets the ear open without restlessness. A small boy listens from the rim of a pool and takes in the city as if it were a language he will always speak. The bathhouse teaches courtesy without speeches. You yield a bench without being asked. You pour a dipper of warm water for the next person and set it down where a hand will find it without searching. You praise the heat as if it were a host. You curse neither the cold plunge nor the slow attendant. The rules come from habit rather than lists. Mixed bathing arrives and recedes with fashion and decree, sometimes permitted in certain hours, sometimes steered apart by custom, that calls itself modesty, the line moving with season and ruler and neighborhood. When women take the rooms, the hum changes register, and the conversations find other subjects with the same ease. No inscription quite agrees on how often or how freely these crossings happened. The rooms remember, but the rooms do not speak. Symbols bloom quietly in corners. A sea god steps in, mosaic with horses that look like waves standing up to greet him. A palm bends on a panel to offer shade that stone alone cannot give. A small lamp bears a dolphin and lights a shelf where cups wait. On the entablature, a vine runs with grapes and leaves, a promise that life ripens if given time. In the steam, skin glows the color of warm clay. Bodies of many shades and scars and ages share the same water without surprise. The bath does not erase difference. It teaches differences to stand without hostility for an hour. Facts travel the tiles like drops. An edict once set the price of entry so low that even a laborer could buy a piece of the afternoon. Some days, a generous patron paid for all, and the door turned into a threshold of gift. Fires never slept in the stoke rooms when a city counted its greatness in baths. A schedule posted in neat letters steered crowds toward order, noting hours for cleaning and for women and for men. Graffiti curled near doorways with little jokes and names and boasts, a library of small truths that later ages would copy with amused affection. Yet you feel how the totals resist neatness. How many bathhouses a district could support without robbing wood from kitchens? How many cups of oil a month an ordinary back required to stay supple? The numbers change with time and purse, and the steam blurs the edges where certainty would prefer a line. You return to the frigidarium for a last clear note. The cold grips and releases. The brain brightens, then settles. You stand, water mapping the skin in thin paths, and the room shines with the kind of light that chooses restraint. An attendant hands you a towel with a face that communicates pride without words. You dress, and the linen remembers your shape. You press a coin into a palm and receive a blessing that mentions health and long evenings. Outside, the street feels new. Dust seems less urgent. The air tastes cleaner, even where kitchens vent their stories to the lane. You carry with you the lesson of the rooms, warmth, then clarity, then warmth again, then a brief kiss of cold to close the day cleanly. In the distance, smoke from the furnaces rises in patient threads. The bathhouse behind you hums like a hive, yet each visitor leaves as if he had been alone with water and fire and thought. Night will come. Lamps will be lit with oil that rode up the river. And bodies will sleep better because stone learned how to speak to flame beneath their feet. The baths fold labor and leisure into one sentence that the city repeats softly until even the restless remember how to be at rest. You enter the long valley where the ground itself has learned to roar. The circus opens like a river of sand between rising banks of people, color laid against color, voices stacked in terraces that hold breath and then release it. You taste dust and fennel seed and the sour sweet of wine carried in little skins. Laurel rustles above the magistrate's box. To your left, a boy knots a ribbon that declares his loyalty. Green, blue, red, white. The factions bloom in tunics and scarf ends, and the city chooses its temporary tribes with the ease of a laugh shared across a street. At the starting line, the chariots stand like coiled words. Teams settle the tracings on the ground with quick, impatient wheels. A slave lifts the rope that holds back the first thunder. The car's frame is light and nervous under the auriga's knees. You see hands find reins in a wrap that bites the waist so the body and the horses can argue as one. The metae wait at each end, tall and close, pillars that have judged ruin and triumph with the same indifference since the last repair. The signal falls. Sound lifts and becomes wind. 4-horse teams reach for air and dust together, bronze fittings flashing like fish scales. The spina holds the center with its eggs and dolphins counting laps, a calm backbone for this surge of blood. You feel how the crowd becomes one body. The first turn narrows throats. A wheel kisses the metae and lives. The second chariot loses a trace and regains it in a knot of skill that belongs to men who ride the edge each day. Sand stings your shins. A man near you chants a name that carries the last syllable, the way a song carries its final note. The charioteer bends at the waist, and the team leans with him as if thought could alter weight. A lap falls. An egg drops. The city studies daring as if it were a language. On days like this, a driver named Scorpus can win enough palms to make even a senator restless with envy, and his death, young, leaves a sadness that many pretend not to feel. The last lap empties lungs. Victory leans ahead by a length you could measure with your forearm. The line passes under the last dolphin. A boy lifts the wreath and the palm, and the winner lowers his head to receive them. The crowd breaks into parts again. Wagers settle in the small theater of the hand. A vendor shakes salt over almonds and makes a snow of them in a bowl. Somewhere across the valley, a scuffle dies without reaching the dignity of a riot. Today, at least, the city remembers how to come together and then politely separate. You climb from the circus and follow a different kind of hunger toward the stone ellipse that has taught the word arena to the languages of the world. The amphitheater rises in stories that learn to hold shadow. Its outer skin shows arches in ranks. Inside, steps accept feet that know where to go. You enter through a numbered gate and feel the space open like a mouth that means to sing for a long time. A great awning waits to be unfurled when sun turns hard. A canvas ship held by ropes in sailors' hands, angling light into something gentler than noon. The floor below is clean sand that remembers other colors and lets them become silence. A program arranges the day. Beasts first, then executions when law uses spectacle to explain itself. Then the pairings that draw breath into a thin line along the teeth. Today, handlers lead cats with ropes and careful eyes, and the animals step with the indifference of royalty. A bear, puzzled by sound, stands and sits again with a human kind of sigh. The crowd meets beauty with fear, and then relaxes when the knife work proves quick. You feel gratitude for distance, and pity for the breath that will not return. The brass cornices catch sun. The shadows ladder down the seats like water seeking its level. When the fighters enter, the noise is a mountain. Helmets with swept crests, short swords warm with oil, nets weighted to promise a snare. These are not boys grabbed at random. They are trained on sand that must be swept each evening like a temple floor. They carry the styles the city has named and categorized with care. Murmillo with a shield like a door and a sword that speaks in short sentences. Retiarius with net and trident, light and taunting. Secutor who hunts the net with smooth armor and eyes that peer through narrow holes. They circle and search for the severity of a real opening. The first clash is sound distilled. Edge on rim, metal on bone. Then the close work begins, and the crowd leans forward as if one more fraction of an inch could carry a thought into a fighter's hand. You read 1,000 small stories on faces. Pride that hides its own hunger. Courage that refuses to waste movement. A glance toward the editor's box that says the day has grown serious. The gesture that asks for mercy has not settled into a single sign that later ages will trust. Thumb turned this way or that, fist closed, wrist twisted, hand flat. The sand accepts the indecision and returns no lesson. A fighter lifts 2 fingers to beg for grace. Sometimes grace comes. Sometimes it does not. The arena keeps its own arithmetic, and the numbers of life and death shift with mood and purse and the appetite of a moment. A memory flickers in the corner of your mind where reports from a provincial town come to rest. In one year, when Nero's name pressed on the city, a riot broke like a bad seam in the amphitheater at Pompeii. Rival crowds forgot that seats are steps into fellowship, and fists and stones answered the insult of a dropped word. The penalty closed the place for years. You carry that story with you as you watch a vendor hand a cup to a man in the color of a different faction. The vendor's casual kindness heals something you did not name. The day softens after victory and loss into lighter entertainments. Masked actors stride onto a small stage to lift a farce that has survived 100 retellings. A slave with a clever mouth fools a master with a slower ear. A husband hides under a couch. A door remains just too narrow for a man who has eaten too well. Knots tied earlier in the first act untie with a flourish in the last. Laughter wins without anger. Pantomime follows in the afternoon with silences that speak. A single dancer telling a full tale by hand and foot, while the flute lays a ribbon of music along the edge of his motions. The mask is expressive because the body carries the soul into visibility. Festivals roll through the calendar like warm tides. On the day of Lupercalia, hills feel the quick step of young men in goat skin, and laughter runs ahead of them as they mark the city with playful touches meant to bless fertility and luck. Saturnalia turns authority upside down for the comfort of remembering that every order is human. Slaves wear caps that mimic freedom. Masters serve at table. Gifts of little figures and candles pass between hands that learn again how to be equal for a day. The household becomes theater, and the city breathes easier for having stretched the stern muscles of rule. A triumph once climbed these streets with a gravity that could silence even the loudest stalls. Laurel crowns, oxen white as winter fog, spoils glinting like a prophecy in reverse. The conqueror rode in a chariot, while a voice at his ear reminded him of the size of time, whispering that victory cannot teach immortality. The crowd shouted until the hills themselves seemed to answer. You stand at a corner where wheels once turned and feel dust that remembers the slow roll of a car hung with gold. You step aside and watch children play with knucklebones in a square of shade. They argue over rules and then forget the argument because the throw was beautiful. A girl draws a line with a stick and calls it a finish. A boy loops a garland into a crown and laughs when it slips to his shoulder. Games are everywhere once you learn to see them. They are the city's practice for joy. Facts drift over the day like unannounced banners. The great amphitheater opened under a prince who promised pleasure to heal the ache of a burnt city, and the first festival of 100 days taught crowds to sit and stare and talk about feats they would never attempt. The circus can hold a population larger than many towns, and its dust carries more names than a senate can recite. Somewhere in the counting of victories and holidays, the precise totals blur. How many contests ended with mercy instead of the last blow? How often did a decree cancel a festival because the treasury was thin? The records answer in part and fall silent in part, and the silence leaves room for the breath of a crowd that will never gather again. Evening lowers like a curtain pulled by patient fingers. The last races run. The last actors bow. A tired vendor tallies what he sold and what he spilled, and then smiles because the day paid. A garland wilts against a step and smells of crushed green and wine. You leave by a stair that returns feet to ordinary ground. Rome will sleep, but not without the aftertaste of dust and laurel and the curious peace that follows hours when thousands moved and shouted and then learned to be quiet at the same time. You pause at a doorway where chalk marks a faint crescent on the threshold, and the house reminds you that every entrance is a little border. A girl sets a crust near a painted niche and touches two small figures with the back of her fingers, the gesture practiced, almost shy. Smoke curls from a pinch of resin. The tiny guardians look toward the kitchen and the street at once, their faces calm, their hands lifted. Lares watch more meals than battles, more lullabies than laws. Beside them, a third presence gazes inward, the genius of the household's master, a spirit drawn in human form because the city prefers to speak to the divine in a language it can recognize. A sprig of laurel dries in the corner. A drop of wine darkens the tiles like a brief eclipse. You stand still and the room teaches you its prayers. At dawn, a crumb. At evening, a little salt. When a child survives fever, a ribbon hung. When a journey ends, a coin offered. The same coin that rattled in a pocket across mountain pass and ferry. The Lararium's colors glow through smoke-soft light. Deep red, black polished by years of cloth, a thin gold line framing a god who keeps house more faithfully than any magistrate could. The slave who tends the shrine has a sure hand and never hurries. The older woman who ties the garland does not speak while she works. In the hush, you hear the city say that holiness belongs to small rooms as surely as to high pediments. The street repeats the lesson at a larger scale. At a crossroads, a square altar holds wreaths woven by different hands, ivy strands crossing laurel in a lazy knot. Children tie woolen bands to the posts and chase one another, while an old man tells them where to stand when the procession comes. Compitalia returns like a homing bird in the depth of winter, and local Laris Compitales receive offerings from neighbors who argue over everything else. Little dolls of wool, little balls for numbers not easily named, tokens for lives under that roof. The rite counts dependents without writing a list. The festival's mood changes with centuries. Some years a magistrate attends and frowns. Some years a practical man brings warm wine and makes the music friendlier than rules require. You learn how neighborhoods keep their own calendars inside the states. On a hill, you step beneath a temple's portico, where shadow cools the heat into civility. The god here prefers column and order, incense and formula, priestly hands and linen clean as truth. A white-fleeced victim stands quiet, adorned with bread and ribbon, the knife heavy with silence. The pontiff lifts a prayer that has been spoken in this language longer than anyone remembers. Augurs have already read the morning sky. A flight's angle, the shape of a silence between wing beats, convinced them the hour is fit. If the cut reveals a good sign, the city will breathe easier for an afternoon. If the liver tells a harsher tale, a second beast may be led forward and courtesies repeated until the omen agrees to be interpreted into peace. On certain days, you hear how public faith rearranges streets. A procession winds from shrine to shrine with musicians who understand that pipes can make order where dust and rumor would rather argue. Offerings travel in baskets, garlands swing from wrists, carved images sway on shoulders with a weight that reminds bearers to watch their step. A boy holds a torch and keeps its small son upright. A lictor clears room with a face that shares nothing of his thoughts. You fall in with the walking and feel how belief is not only a posture of the mind, but a choreography of feet, a way to thread the city with gratitude and requests and remembrance. You pass the round house of holy fire where the city's breath is kept. Vestals move through the doorway, quiet as water under ice. Their discipline is older than the empire and sharper. The flame has survived rains and troubles because they learned how to turn wood into patience. When disaster strikes, the ground shaking as if remembering a different sea, a night of flames running along roofs, citizens glance toward that round place to see whether the light still speaks. The day Rome insisted on bringing the Great Mother's black stone from distant Pessinus to heal the ache of war, a Vestal's hand helped anchor the miracle on its last stretch of river. The tale lives in whispers with different endings and the same gratitude. In the forum, a marble altar bears the calm face of a prince's peace. You read its frieze like a soft-spoken report. Processions carved into obedience, children whose hands clutch modest gifts, vines heavy with every season at once. After a long century of anxious knives, Augustus stitched religion and city back together with rebuilding and titles, setting the pontifex's mantle on his own shoulders, mending old temples, rededicating a calendar that knew how to accommodate both sowing and sacrifice. The calendar that counts markets and trials also counts God's days, because Rome prefers a ledger with multiple columns: civic, sacred, necessary, beautiful. If you drift toward the river's quarter where foreign tongues become Rome's weather, the gods wear new names without losing their old faces. You pass a doorway where a bell of bronze calls the faithful of Isis to fresh water and a hymn that smells of Nile mud and jasmine. The floor lays out constellations with black stars on white. Gold glints on a statue's sleeve. In the dim, a woman prays for healing. A sailor asks for a wind that is brisk but not cruel. The goddess listens in an accent that Rome decides to understand. Down another lane, a door opens onto a Mithraeum half buried, a cave under the city where a bull's sacrifice is carved into eternity, and lamps blossom in a ring around a tauroctony, only initiates claim to read fully. Men of the legions and the elements gather at benches that line the walls, eat a sacred meal they never carry outdoors, and keep a calendar whose marks ride inside memory more than on stone. Familiar faiths stand beside these without flinching. In Transtiberum, a gathering place holds the words of a law older than marble. Lamps burn clean, fringes brush sleeves, and scrolls breathe resin and time. A trader recites a psalm that makes exile into a compass. He weighs the cost of Sabbath against the profit of the sixth day and keeps his accounts with a conscience that answers to a different senate. In another domus, quieter than a whisper, men and women break bread and murmur stories about a teacher who washed feet and dined with those who had been walked around. Their words are cautious at first. No need to announce what is still forming. But warmth is unmistakable, and the steward's wife insists that leftover loaves go to a widow upstairs. The city has room until it decides it does not. Years will teach which rooms must dim their lights. There is a theater beneath the customs. A boy fingers a little charm shaped like a winged phallus, more laughter than fear, yet held like a shield against Malachio. A child wears a bulla, small amulet at the throat, until the day a family removes it in a rite that gives the world permission to test him harder. A bride lets wool bind her to a doorway, a measure of modesty knotted into celebration. Then moves in sprigs and veil to a bed that neighbors had carried through the streets so the gods would notice the transfer and approve. Names matter to all this. Janus at the threshold, Juno at the marriage bed, Vesta at the hearth, Mercury by the purse and road, Silvanus at the field's edge. The city pronounces them like kin. Questions walk beside the certainties like quiet companions. How much of any given sacrifice is belief, and how much is performance that keeps the social floor from cracking? How far inward did the imperial cult reach beyond public vows and altars? And how often was the oath to an emperor's genius a formality rather than devotion? When Romans said that all gods could live together, did they mean all gods might be the same seen from different angles? Or only that peace is easier when nobody insists on a single door? The records murmur answers unevenly, and the statues keep their marble counsel. At dusk, you return to the first threshold. The household intelligences receive a final crumb. A tiny flame burns blue for a moment and then lies down in the wick. A mother strokes a child's hair and whispers the name of a protective god as if the name were a lullaby. Somewhere a haruspex warms his hands above ashes and reviews the day's livers in memory. Somewhere an augur lifts his eyes into a sky where the evening star has just declared itself. The city gathers its petitions and its gratitude into rooms small enough for sleep. Beyond those rooms, temples stand like chess pieces choosing not to move. The Tiber carries the light of altars in thin, broken paths, and the stone bridges keep the faith of foot and hoof and wheel with their own kind of piety. When you close your eyes, you still see a doorway, chalk pale against dark stone, a mark renewed by a hand that believes renewal is the point. In Rome, the sacred does not flee the ordinary. It learns the ordinary's habits, keeps the hours, and meets you every time you lift a latch. You wake to the click of stylus on wax, a soft percussion that sounds like rain learned to write. In a small room open to the street, boys gather around a low bench where the literator traces letters with a stick that gleams from use. The floor smells of cedar shavings and lamp smoke. Tablets lie in pairs bound with cord, their black beeswax smoothed with a warmed knife until it shines. The master's voice is a calm rope. He ties sound to sign and sign to meaning, and the children repeat until breath and mark agree. A boy's bulla thumps gently on his chest as he leans forward. A girl in a neat mantle sits at the edge and watches, copying on her own wax while a mother bargains for figs outside. Learning in Rome begins where noise and patience can share a room. You sit near the door and feel how the day loosens as letters take hold. A child scratches a crooked A and stops to scrape the wax flat with the broad end of the stylus, then tries again until the lines stand like straight reeds by water. Syllables step together into words. Words become the names of tools and gods and streets. The master rewards memory with a nod that feels larger than it looks. He lifts a tablet where a proverb waits. Grain gathers slowly, so does understanding. The room smiles without saying it aloud. Older students walk to a portico where the grammaticus keeps a small court of texts. He rolls out a poem until the hexameters lie like paving stones and asks a boy to find the place where the river in the line changes speed. A girl answers first, and the teacher bows as if to a senator. They read of journeys and losses and of a man who trusted his craft more than luck. The words bloom with commentary. A verb is weighed. A myth is tested against memory. One student copies a passage on papyrus with ink that smells faintly of gum and smoke. He pauses to breathe on the reed pen, and the letters darken with renewed wetness. You hear the city training the tongue and the ear to move with a kind of measure that law will later require. At the next stage, the rhetor gathers ambitious faces under a painted ceiling. He demonstrates how voice can carry a room without shouting. His hand traces arcs that the student's eyes learn to follow. He assigns a case from a book of exercises where pirates become a question about mercy and greed, or where a father and a city argue over loyalty. A boy arranges points on a wax tablet like chess pieces. Another practices the opening that will make a judge lean forward. The rhetor praises clarity more than thunder. He taps a shoulder and says the sentence must fit the fact the way a key fits a lock. You feel the young men try on the future as if it were a well-cut cloak. Between rooms, knowledge moves in quieter forms. A mother teaches a daughter household accounts with pebbles and lines and a basket that grows lighter or heavier with each entry. A freedman shows his son how to read the chalk on a wine shop wall where prices change with the wind. In a bathhouse, a barber keeps a copy of verses to recite when the razor hesitates, and the customer corrects a line from memory. Graffiti in neat hands and rough ones climb the walls of a street near a bakery, boasting, praying, teasing, selling. You trace a line that praises a girl named Iris and another that offers a room to rent. Writing is not only for marble and law, it belongs to doors and amphorae and lovers who need to risk a name. You walk toward the forum, where learning turns into judgment. The basilica receives the day's arguments. Its shadows soothing hot tempers. Magistrates sit in a cool stripe of shade while lictors keep a quiet corridor through the crowd. Clients and patrons arrange themselves like phrases that require grammar. A man unrolls a contract and its neat columns shine. A witness touches a seal ring against the wax to show that his memory agrees with the text. The hum of Latin legal words steadies the air. Formulae march in tried order so that chance cannot pretend to be justice. On a wall nearby, an old promise still speaks. A memory of bronze tablets survives in copies and commentaries, the 12 tables that once stood in public where a citizen could learn what was forbidden and what was allowed. You picture boys reciting them at school until their tongues knew where penalty followed offense and where inheritance should flow when words in a will ran dry. Those early rules set bones in the city's body. A later emperor will make the praetor's yearly edict stand still as a single text, the edictum perpetuum, so that litigants know the ground beneath their feet. Names come and go, but the habit of posting what binds the many to the few remains. A jurist sits under a column and answers questions as steadily as a water clock measures time. He cites opinions with a care that makes each source feel like a respected elder at table. He explains how a dowry returns, how a boundary is marked, how a guardian counts the coin he is not allowed to spend. His words travel to benches and shops, and sometimes into imperial ears. He believes that reason belongs to everyone who will do the work of listening. A scribe beside him lifts his head at a phrase and writes it down to teach to students later. New edicts and rescripts will come when rulers feel the tug of petitions. The jurist's craft is to keep the river within banks while allowing boats to pass. You watch a case unfold. Two neighbors argue about the day a wall began to lean. Witnesses speak in measured voices. The judge asks for the tablet that recorded a repair last winter. He reads with his lips moving just a little, then looks up and calls for a surveyor to set his cords. The cords shine in the sun, and the knots remember distances that hands learned long ago. The verdict settles like a stone that finally found level. You feel relief pass through the crowd in a small wave and see how law is not only decision, but also a return to balance that lets work resume. A clerk posts the day's notices where eyes can find them. Announcements of games, auctions of estates, the names of men chosen for offices that will carry them toward the higher steps of the ladder. News from the provinces arrives on tablets brought by riders who sleep badly for the sake of speed. A small boy stands on tiptoe to read a line about a road repaired beyond a river that his feet have never crossed. The world gathers on these boards and grows familiar one sentence at a time. Symbols hold the rooms together. Wax tablets click shut with cords like little belts. Seal rings rest on knuckles like sleeping eyes. The toga for court lies heavy on the shoulder and declares a citizen's burden in a language of cloth. A boy's purple-edged garment tells the street he is not yet fully answerable for his errors. The cap of a freedman glows like a quiet star at the edge of a crowd. A scroll rod creaks when turned. A chest of papyrus smells of gum and long journeys and reminds you that libraries are storage not only for words, but for time itself. Facts stand up and introduce themselves, then politely sit. The 12 tables emerged when families tired of secrets and demanded rules they could read. The praetor's edict once shifted each year until an emperor fixed it to reduce surprise. Schools lived in rented rooms where noise from the street insisted on becoming part of the lesson. Libraries opened in bath complexes and porticos so that reading could borrow the ease of water and shade. Fees for teachers rose and fell with fashion and the ambition of neighborhoods. Yet totals blur where you would prefer sharpness. How many Romans could truly read without stumbling? How often did girls sit at the grammarian's feet beyond the mercy of a kind father or a generous aunt? How far into the alleys did the habit of writing reach when papyrus cost more than bread? Afternoon softens the city's voice. A teacher lets students go with a final line to copy at home. The jurist closes his book and ties it with a strip of leather. A judge removes his ring and rubs the mark on his finger as if to ease the pressure of decisions that will never be perfect. Children skip and sing a rhyme about the months. A scribe breathes on his last line to set it and the ink shines briefly. You carry the click of stylus and the murmur of the basilica with you as you step back into the street. Rome has taught you that letters are tools and companions, that law is a fence and a path, and that the city keeps its shape by sentences as much as by stones. Night draws its first line across the roofs, and Rome answers with flame. You hear a lamp cough in a doorway and catch the almond breath of oil. Shutters close like tired eyelids. In the lane, a woman lifts a lantern where a dolphin swims in relief along the clay, and the wick takes light with a tiny sigh. Evening orders the city differently. The carts that rattled all day carry their axles inside the walls now that the hour permits it, and the wheels write low thunder under the stars. Over everything, the watch begins, the measured vigilance that keeps a wooden city from becoming a rumor of ash. You walk toward a small square where a cistern lies under stone, its rim rubbed smooth by ropes and buckets. Beside it, a bell hangs on an iron bracket, a round mouth waiting to shout when smoke climbs wrong. A wooden ladder sleeps on trestles. Hooks, coils of line, leather helmets, wet capes that shine with a dull, protective sheen, the tools of men who know fire as a patient enemy. A tablet lists the rota for the night. Names stand in chalk, and under them, a word that binds, vigilare, to keep awake. The vigils gather with the modest pride of artisans. Their tunics are darker, their belts heavier, their steps taught to move fast without panic. A decurion counts heads, then doles the watchword, a single syllable that unlocks friendly doorways and closes dishonest mouths. Siphonariae check the pumps whose pistons breathe water up from cistern to hose, their wood polished by palms. Centenari fold fire blankets, thick pads soaked in vinegar, so a man can climb a stair wrapped like a human tile and smother sparks along a beam. They joke until the officer's hand lifts, then the noise folds into readiness like sails furled against a change of wind. Torches touch off along a street and make a dotted path of honey-colored light. You fall in with a pair who walk their beat, sandals soft on stone, eyes teaching themselves corners. They pause at an insula where the upper floors lean as if tired. A tenant pours a thin line of water along the hearth's edge before sleep. The smell of lentils lingers on the stair. A little plaque near the door shows a helmet and ladder, proof the owner paid his dues to the collegium that will help if flame bites the rafters. In a domus nearby, a steward checks the brazier and sets a dish of embers in a bed of sand, then covers a lamp with a pierced lid so the god of the house may keep vigil without setting the curtains singing. Inside the lararium, a wick burns low for Vesta's borrowed presents. A child kisses two fingers and touches the air above it, as if smoothing the night. From a distance, the aqueducts answer too. Their high spines carry water by day, but at night their strength lies hidden beneath your feet. Castella that feed basins, basins that marry buckets, buckets that give men confidence to run toward danger without stopping to beg the river's mercy. A message passes down the street like a sparrow, smoke at the Subura's edge, and the vigils turn into wind. The bell wakes and keeps waking. Ladders lift, hooks bite, a team braces a pump and drives the handles like the oars of a galley. Water hisses against eaves. A woman leans from a window with a bundle. A blanket stretches. She drops and prays. The bundle lands and cries like a lamb. Someone cheers without meaning to. The flame sulks at the wet cloth and withdraws to a darker corner. A man slaps a spark from his sleeve and laughs, then quietly shakes. The city has learned these steps from hard lessons. You feel that history as heat held in stone. In a summer when rumor ran faster than water, fire rose near the circus, and the wind drove it into a scythe that shaved streets down to their names. Nights turned red for days. Marble cracked like ice. People ran toward the river with furniture on their backs. Others ran in circles because no direction felt like salvation. Stories cannot agree on what an emperor did with his hours. Whether he sent aid and opened gardens, whether he watched from a height, whether he ordered songs while the city burned. But the ash that settled afterward taught reforms no rhetoric could. Streets were widened so wind might break. Party walls climbed in brick. Rules forbade wooden eaves that once kissed across lanes. Insulae learned ceilings that listened to the weight of water in pipes instead of the whisper of dry reed. You stop at a corner shrine where a fresh garland cools the stone, and the watch salutes with two fingers. Piety patrols with them in small ways. A crumb left for a threshold god, a knot tightened where a charm slipped, a quick prayer to a river that swallows sparks with more patience than men. In the next block, a public notice threatens fines for shopkeepers who leave braziers careless in doorways. Below it, a smaller hand has added a line, and for poets who drink near lamps. The vigils smile without removing the joke. Humor is a kind of order, too. Past midnight, the city's other guardians keep their lines. The urban cohorts move with the authority of polished crests, the law's heavier hand for knives and ambushes, while the watchmen guard roofs and rafters and keep thieves from finding ladders useful. A citizen's lamp sways down a lane, and the bearer raises it to show his face when the patrol's shadows open like a book. The watchword returns from mouth to mouth and proves peace. Somewhere, a tavern still hums. The door stands half open, a rectangle of amber against the street's blue. Dice kiss wood. A flute tries one phrase too often. The watch passes, and the tavern's light folds smaller without resentment. A house door opens on the Aventine, and hush flows out. A man steps barefoot to the impluvium, scoops water with both hands, and gives it to the night. His father taught him that gesture when lightning frightened him as a boy. Down on the riverbank, barges knock gently and lines creak. The Tiber keeps a slower watch, its surface showing broken stars like coins spent and retrieved by a god who refuses to count. In a lane off the Velabrum, a cutter of seals works his late hour, intaglios no larger than a fingernail, and the single lamp by his elbow turns his breath into gold dust. Symbols sit where sight grows thin. At a doorway, a chalked crescent freshens itself against envy and flames. At a corner, the bronze wolf on a fountain bears calm teeth where boys cool their feet. On a barracks wall, a painted Neptune holds a ship in one hand and a harpoon in the other, promising that water and iron together are stronger than bad luck. Bells sleep between alarms. The leather caps dry slowly near the stove. A sleeping dog lifts its head to listen and then trusts the silence. Order wears no laurel here. It prefers a plain belt and a good rope. You remember numbers the night likes to keep half hidden. 7 cohorts of vigiles, they say, each named for a region, each with barracks and cistern and ladders in neat rows. Yet how many men stood their posts on a winter night when pay ran late? How many hoses reached the 4th story before someone lost his nerve? How often did a bribe buy a turning head when a warehouse chose to burn for profit? The ledgers give one answer, the gossip another, and the truth crawls somewhere between them like a coal that glows without flame. Toward dawn, the watch returns in thinner lines. Boots scuff, ladders lower to their rests. A clerk notes the hour of alarm and the names of those who answered it first. Smoke clings to hair and tunics the way salt clings to sailors' hands. A boy pours water over a pump handle to cool it, and the steam comes off with a sound like the last breath of a kettle. Someone prays a small thanks to a nameless saint of dry rafters. Someone else kisses a bronze charm and promises less wine by lamplight. The bell quiets. The cistern reflects a triangular slice of pale sky. You step into the early gray and feel the city receive its reward for caution. Roofs uncharred, doors unwarped, the common bread of morning not yet ash. Night has kept its side of the pact. The household hearths sleep safely under their clay mouths. Lamps go out with a soft inward curl. The watchword for the next night already waits, cool and dense on a shard of wax, a seed of order small enough to carry in a pocket. A cock wakes on an upper balcony and scratches his punctuation into the sentence of dawn. Rome straightens its back. The men who fought smoke become men who buy onions. The leather of helmets dries beside sandals. You look up at the skyline, temples, tenements, arches, and understand that persistence is also an architecture. The city teaches you that peace in wooden hours comes from ordinary rigor, a folded blanket, a ready ladder, a neighbor who knows which bell to pull and does not hesitate. The first sun finds the rim of a bucket and turns it briefly to gold, and the day inherits a city that slept but never entirely closed its eyes. You listen for Rome's quietest engine and hear it in the rooms where linen breathes and ledgers whisper. The day finds you in a doorway edged with wool cords, where a woman's hand measures out the morning. She ties her hair with a ribbon, the color of underripe olive, and sets the house moving with a murmur. The loom calls in the corner, a light clatter like rain on a tiled roof. The shuttle slides, the weft answers. A pattern grows with a patience that teaches the room how to hold itself together. The scent of clean wool and warm bread mingles, and the house understands who is captain. She wears a stola that falls without fuss and a palla for the street, dignity layered over warmth. On a shelf, a small statue of Pudicitia lowers her eyes, the right hand drawing the veil near the cheek, the famous gesture that turns modesty into marble. On another shelf, a box holds seal rings and key hooks, and beside it, a wax tablet records oil deliveries, wages paid, wine set aside for a wedding. The steward brings numbers. She answers with grain. Both know which account will keep the family taller on lean days. You watch her test a fabric between fingers. The cloth behaves. The day will too. Voices cross the atrium. A client arrives for her husband. She receives him because the husband stands at court. She serves watered wine and finds a promise that will honor both gratitude and budget. Later, a contractor bows deeper to her than to the man of the house. He learned long ago who keeps the purse's lock and who remembers the last price of brick. A cousin brings a riddle of dowry and inheritance. She lifts the stylus and smooths the wax and solves it with 2 lines and a witness. The law puts women under guardians more often than not, but wits keep their own jurisdiction. And practice, in this city, is law's older sister. In a small chest lies a veil folded with care, a wedding remembered without noise. You can almost hear nuts cracking on the street as boys shouted for luck that day. A yoke was carried in the procession to swear that marriage meant a single path for 2. The doorposts touched her fingers with oil, and she crossed the threshold lifted, not stepping, so no shadow of ill could catch on the soul. Febrile infants strengthened at her breast. Winter nights were told to mind their manners by her lamp. When a child came, she laid a tiny lunula amulet at the throat and learned new fears that no amulet could silence. Out in the city, women move with the same composed purpose. A matron comes home from the matronalia with laurel in her hair and gifts exchanged with the household, March's first day turning war god to protector, marriage to pact renewed. In a back lane, a midwife rinses her hands in warm water, scented with rue. A bundle of reed pens and black thread waits beside her kit. In the Subura, an ornatrix turns a girl's hair into a crown of braids so precise it seems the fingers are counting doctrine rather than strands. A freedwoman at the river's quarter tallies clay lamps by the dozen. Her stamp will burn into the bottoms, name, workshop, pride, and travel to stairwells the city over. The market hears women's sums more often than the formal histories admit. You walk to a shrine where the marble face of a prince shows children clutching their mother's hands among vines that promise plenty. Augustan laws rewrote parts of the household's grammar. Rewards for bearing 3 children, privileges at the theater, penalties for late marriages that stung softer on parchment than in living rooms. Seating at spectacles changed too. Women learned the back rows by decree, except at games where custom could lean kinder. Law reshapes gesture. Gesture reshapes memory. The city wears both changes as naturally as a seasoned woman wears a ring where a worker's callus permits. You sit in a garden and hear a name carried like a standard of virtue. Cornelia, mother of the Gracchi, who pointed to her sons when asked about jewels and made modesty into eloquence. Nearby, another name rides the air with different music. Livia, wife of Augustus, whose clean lines and measured words taught palaces to find their level. Between these heights others stand, half seen but substantial. A tomb along the Appian insists in neat letters that Claudia walked straight, kept house, spun wool, formula that turns labor into laurel. A laudatio recalls Turia, who bargained with tyrants and offered her life for her husband's safety. The stone speaks long after voices close their doors. The priesthoods also hold their particular doors ajar. Vestal virgins pass with steps that do not hurry, their veils like thin clouds refusing to dissolve. They keep the city's breath in a round house, free from guardianship, honored with front-row places, and the right to pardon a condemned man who meets them by chance, if chance can be called chance, when ritual watches. Their discipline is iron wrapped in linen. Their privileges prove that Rome knows how to trust women when the city's heart is at stake. Elsewhere, behind a domestic threshold, fragrant with pine and secrecy, the rites of the good goddess keep men out by custom and scandal. A night remembered when a restless noble in woman's clothing tested a boundary and tore a city's patience. The year tells 62 before Christ is counted. You turn down a street in Ostia's shadow where inscriptions remember merchants with women's names. A ship's agent sells grain on her own account. A bakeress runs ovens that refuse to rest. A purple-dyed dealer counts jars that have swallowed many seas. In collegia halls, wreaths are set for benefactresses who paid for benches and lamps. At a corner, a doctor's sign bears a drawing of forceps and a quiet promise that a woman will be seen with understanding. Between lines of business and lines of birth, the city grows a lattice in which women are not exceptions but structure. Home returns, as homes do. A mother lifts a stylus from a child's fist and guides a letter into shape. A grandmother sings the long syllables that make sleep drift closer. The day's wool dries on a line. The distaff leans like a slender sentinel. Divorce visits this city without thunder. A tablet signed, a dowry counted back, a carriage summoned with fewer witnesses than a poet prefers. Some partings are kindness. Others are skill with a prettier name. A widow can stand her own ground, her keys louder at her belt, her lawsuits carried on tablets that shine like patient water in sun. You notice the street's jewelry, bulle removed from boys when childhood loosens, but from girls earlier, the lunula set aside as garments change, hair rising into towers of curls when fashion urges the city skyward. Pins like spears in miniature, securing both coiffure and reputation. The pose of statues repeats in living bodies, the pudicitiae tilt of face and fingers, the Venus belt adjusted with a glance that makes modesty a form of power. In theaters, women sit where law says, and yet their murmurs steer reputations as surely as clack leaders clap on command. A single day offers facts enough to anchor the tale. Vestals stand outside Tutilla and own property by right. The Lex Julia and the Lex Papia Poppaea coax families into fruitfulness with bright incentives and small threats. Seating reforms teach hierarchy to crowds with the firmness of a chalk line. Women sign dedications, endow guilds, manage estates. In houses, they keep tablets fairer than many clerks. In streets, they buy and sell with a grace that wears arithmetic like a bracelet. Beside the facts walks a companion you cannot quite seize. How widely did letters travel into women's hands beyond the circles where epitaphs blaze with pride? How often did a matron's advice bend a senator's vote when the lamps were low? How many businesses bore a husband's name while a wife's mind did the counting? The city lets you glimpse answers the way a curtain breathes at evening, enough to prove life, not enough to still curiosity. Dusk leans over the peristyle, and the fountain writes calm into stone. She you have followed through these rooms, lights a lamp and ties off the thread she began this morning. She places a bowl on a table with the precision of a verdict and kisses a sleeping child on the brow with the softness of law tempered by mercy. On the Lorarium's ledge, Pudicicia's marble veil brightens in flame. Outside, vendors call the last of the figs. Inside, the ledger closes with a click that sounds like a promise, and the loom rests with its shuttle nested like a bird. You wake into a city that looks familiar until you notice the small tilts, the way a sleeve hangs, the cut of a sandal strap, the rhythm of a street song that borrowed a note from far away. Change has a habit of arriving quietly. It sits first on a windowsill, a jar with a new stamp, a coin with a newer face, a haircut that makes neighbors talk across a line of laundry. You walk and the stones are the same beneath your feet, yet the air has learned a different perfume, a thread of foreign resin braided into pine. A barber's shop opens and men drift in with the morning. The master runs a comb through a young patrician's hair and leaves it close and neat, unlike the curled towers men preferred when the last dynasty stood smiling on coins. In a corner hangs a bust with a beard cut crisp and short. Once Rome loved an upper lip naked as marble. Then a prince returned from Greek roads loving philosophy and travel, and beards spread like ivy over jawlines. The fashion never fully left. A slave trims with careful hands. Hair falls like commas into a tray and is brushed away as if the sentence had already been revised. In the market, a bolt of cloth glows with a blue that was once a rumor. A woman smooths the weave and feels a softness that belongs to distant looms. A trader names the port where the bales were unwrapped. The word lands in Roman mouths and becomes ordinary by noon. Perfume sellers measure drops of myrrh and balsam and a sweetness that remembers deserts at night. An old woman sniffs and smiles, certain that some scents teach memory rather than desire. A little boy points at a glass cup whose color is sea-caught and convinced to hold shape. He sees the world bend in it. His mother sees proof that hands on another shore master fire with a patience domesticated by law and guild. Not far away, a mason sets his level against a new wall and stones listen. Where gardens once rested along the city's edge, work crews move along a line that will stiffen Rome's spine. Blocks rise in courses steady as breathing. The wall circles the city like a calm arm. The year carries the name of a soldier emperor who understood that borders can be a roof against bad weather. Men mutter gratitude between blows of the mallet. The countryside feels suddenly farther away and the hearth closer. Gates learn new habits. The night watch's confidence grows, paced by fresh milestones that now end at brick towers. On a corner, a money changer lays out coins in little suns and moons. He tips one on edge. It wobbles. He hears in the metal a thinner voice than his father would have accepted. Prices follow these whispers. A loaf that once agreed to stay at 4 pennies leans upward toward 5. A woman adds a sprig of rosemary to the basket and subtracts a fig. She nods without bitterness. Markets talk in many tongues. This one speaks of silver trimmed thinner each reign, of copper taking on more of the load, of promises engraved with eagles while the metal underneath grows shy. Later, a prince will post a list of maximum prices, stone pretending it can scold appetite. Chalkboards pay attention for a season, then learn again that law cannot measure thirst like a careful hand behind a counter. On an afternoon when business thins, a crier reads an edict in a square. The words carry like a clean wind. They announce that the city has widened, not by streets or by walls, but by blood and name. Men from towns whose dust never reached these sandals now hear the word citizen and feel it touch their foreheads. The paper calls it a constitution that grants rights with one sweep of ink, and though taxes inched behind the promise like a shadow, the mouths in the square open in amazement. You imagine a soldier on a frontier hearing that his children will speak in courts with a voice the city must heed. You picture a trader in a mountain town rolling a seal ring on his finger with a new seriousness. The empire has suddenly grown inside its own skin. Even a calendar can turn the day into a different hour. Long ago, a statesman counted the sky more closely and persuaded months to behave. He set a leap that arrives like a polite visitor and evens the ground under farmers' feet. Years later, another emperor will rename a stretch of summer in his own honor, placing syllables where weather already kept its own counsel. The market keeps selling. The temple bells still learn the morning. Yet the chalk on a shop wall carries new numbers, and the names on festival garlands learn a slightly altered dance. At the baths, the talk changes tint. A group of men lifts a small toast to a Syrian priest who has the emperor's ear and whose sun god smiles with a circle of rays. The cult brings a sharp clarity to some, a sense that one light is enough. Elsewhere, a quiet house fills at dawn with neighbors who break bread and exchange peace in words that soften even a rough mouth. Their symbol is a fish traced with a finger where few will notice. Their god listens in ordinary rooms and asks for a gentleness that worries magistrates who prefer strength to look like iron. Some families keep a little of everything on their shelves and decide the heart can hold more than one loyalty if the hands stay clean. In a portico, a poet performs a piece on a city that learned to divide the audience into neat sectors. Senators here, equestrians there, women in a band that sees everything, vestals and ambassadors with room at the front. The poet makes the crowd laugh because the rule of where to sit often says who you are before your mouth opens. A passing rumor says an emperor with a soldier's gait has moved the purple farther from the street and drawn a heavier curtain around the palace. Another rumor says the army loves him because he looks ordinary when he eats. The city shrugs and adjusts. Palaces teach etiquette in one direction, kitchens in another. The poor learn virtuous frugality when grain runs thin. The rich learn to praise frugality without changing the number of courses. Change in Rome always contains its own reply. You stand in a warehouse where jars are stacked like hives. The stamps quiver in amber light. Spain sends oil that keeps lamps faithful. Africa feeds mouths as if Rome were one long table. The grain fleet grows a second harbor, and then a better one. A lighthouse marks a channel with a finger of fire. A clerk runs his reed pen down a column of figures until the page believes him. When storms push ships late, the city grows sharp with worry and then eases when masts show again around the bend. Generosity travels with these loads. A benefactor pays for public distribution in a hungry month. His name goes on a plaque in letters that will last longer than the dignity he enjoys for a week. The plaque smiles from a wall. The memory of warm bellies smiles in smaller rooms. On the street, tunics have learned to be shorter or longer according to season and rule. The toga remains, heavy as duty, too honest for alleys. Men who speak before magistrates pull it over a shoulder and wear its curve like a line of law. At home, they unbuckle it and reach for fabric that forgives. Women test pins with new shapes and let their hair learn the language of the rain, piled to rival a statue or smoothed to invite a calmer gaze. Little things tell the story of a century more reliably than marble. The cut of a shoe, the way a coin scratches a palm, the note a mother chooses for a lullaby that mentions a god whose name her grandmother never sang. A painter lifts a wet brush in a room where yesterday's wall shows a layer of older red beneath new black. He lets a small Egyptian ibis step through a Roman vine. He signs in a corner with a mark understood by 3 people and forgotten by 4. Graffiti gathers quietly along a stair. A soldier leaves a line about a girl who does not wave when he passes. A vendor writes the price of olives and leaves space to change it tomorrow. Children draw a ship. The city is a palimpsest that never fully dries. Old laws show through new paint. Old habits survive under new gods. Somewhere a clerk locks a chest and breathes on his hands because the air has cooled. He has counted a day into obedience. Somewhere a philosopher warms to the thought that truth does not weaken when it crosses a border. Somewhere a woman folds a veil and decides to wear a color her mother would have thought too bold. You carry one certainty and one companion. The certainty is that Rome survives by teaching change to speak a Roman dialect, turning novelty into routine. The companion is a quiet wondering that never fully sleeps. How far inward did the new gods enter the kitchens before they entered the forums? How completely did a grant of citizenship make strangers feel at home? How much did the thinness of coins translate into empty bowls in alleys you have not walked? The stones do not answer. They prefer to hold your footsteps while you think. Evening touches the walls. Lamps bloom where doorways invite them. The city gathers the day's alterations into a single face that looks like yesterday from a distance, and then smiles differently when you step close. You walk with that smile toward the hour when shutters meet, and you feel how the eternal city keeps its name, not by staying the same, but by learning how to keep its soul while changing its clothes. The air cools along the shoulders of the 7 hills, and Rome gathers its hours the way a mother gathers toys from a floor, unhurried and sure. Shops fold their shutters with a wooden sigh. A fig seller counts what remains and gives one soft fruit to a boy who stared too long and too politely. A porter washes dust from his ankles at a fountain where a bronze mask pours a thin thread of silver into a stone basin. Evening turns market cries into low talk. Lamps wake along arcades like patient stars that learned masonry. You walk toward the forum and feel how the day thickens into memory. Columns darken at the edges, and the first bat writes a sentence you cannot read across the sky. Statues take on more gravity in this light. A laurel wreath droops at the base of a plinth, its scent now quieter, its leaves crisp with the afternoon's heat and the night's approach. The pavement keeps the warmth of many feet. An aedile rolls up a notice listing tomorrow's cases. A clerk ties a bundle of tablets with a leather thong and holds it for a long second, as if listening to the quiet pulse of all the names inside. On the Capitoline, shadows pool like cool wine in the steps. A magistrate's retinue dissolves into private silhouettes. A lictor lifts his fasces to his shoulder with a motion that has forgotten spectacle and remembers only duty. Somewhere farther north, a bell in a bathhouse marks the closing hour. Steam lingers, drifts into alleys, and vanishes. You follow the thin warmth and see attendants stacking strigils, oil flasks, and towels in neat rows for the morning. The floor still gleams where feet passed all afternoon, a sheen left by oil and water and the soft insistence of bodies unwinding their burdens. A household door opens, and the day changes key. The lararium glows as if it were breathing. A woman touches 2 small figures with the back of her fingers and lays a crumb for the quiet guardians that have watched her children grow taller than the lintel's first mark. A steward sets a shallow cup of wine on the threshold and whispers gratitude for a day that did not fray. From a window above, a lullaby floats down, a melody that remembers older songs about fields and rain, taught by a grandmother whose hands measured grain before they measured letters with a child. Across a street, an insula leans into the night like a ship at rest. Toes of sandals hook over a balcony rail. 2 friends share half a round of bread, and the end of a story about a day that felt larger than the coins it paid. A rope creaks where laundry still wants the last breath of heat. A woman lights a lamp shaped like a little dolphin and carries it along a corridor. Doors breathe open and shut as bowls and plates find places to sleep. The building murmurs with the small talk of survival, the gossip of pipes and stairs, and neighbors who save one another a little trouble where the city cannot reach. You cross a bridge, and the Tiber keeps its own rehearsal of dusk. Pilings knock a slow rhythm. The water wears stripes of fading gold where the last sun slips between roofs. Barges list lightly. A deckhand hums, and his voice knows the difference between current and tide, even if he has never seen the sea. The river has learned to remember. It holds the taste of salt from far shipments, the sweetness of fruit skins thrown from baskets, the grit of brick dust from kilns. It also carries the ashes of days when flames taught new caution. The river is the city's old companion, not always kind, never willing to leave. You turn under an arch that has watched many rains and find a wall where boys have scratched ships and names and a small heart pierced with a line that means love more than wound. Fresh chalk glints. A baker's apprentice has written tomorrow's hours so his master will see them at dawn. The heart sits beside a figure of victory drawn with a firm hand, and for a moment you feel how triumph and affection share the same street. Far away in a basilica, an advocate ties his toga's fold for the last time today and thinks about an argument he will shape tomorrow. His lips move without sound, weighing the word that opens a case like a gate swinging true. The city keeps symbols ready for night. A chalk crescent touches a lintel. A bronze wolf on a fountain shows teeth that mean guardianship rather than fear. A bulla hangs from a child's neck as he rolls into sleep, and a mother feels for it gently, a ritual that has become a reflex. In a barracks, a centurion checks a roster by lamplight and marks an absence with a dot that will be corrected by morning when a runner returns. On the Palatine, a gardener waters a laurel tree that remembers older hands and older victories, and the water sound threads the darkness into something friendly. Facts walk with you even now. The city once declared a center from which all miles were counted, a golden point that gathered roads as a hand gathers threads. The calendar married the business of fields and lawsuits so the year would not stumble. Bread reached mouths because ships found safe water at a harbor, cut by rulers who loved geometry and order. The watch learned to run with ladders because a summer once unstitched streets. These are the bones under the evening's skin. They do not need to speak to be present. Beside the facts, mysteries keep step. How often did a widow's modest donation keep a shrine's flame when the magistrate forgot the budget? How many names were learned only by neighbors and never by stone? Which child who sleeps tonight will one day hold a seal ring and imagine the city into a new shape with patient acts rather than a single shout? You hear no answers. You are not disappointed. A city that survives centuries owes something to questions that do not nag, only hum. At last, the hills become darker, backs under a field of mild stars. The last carts have slipped through the gates. The vigils lean their ladders and hang their wet blankets to breathe. A late singer lets a line wander from a doorway, and it finds a second voice in a nearby room, then a third, until the tune moves like a quiet procession without torches. You stand at your own threshold and feel the day's grit ease from your shoulders. Rome folds the ordinary into a clean bundle and sets it by the bed of time. The lamp in your hand makes a small, steady circle. Within it you see olive sheen, terracotta, fingerprints on a bowl, a stitch in a sleeve, the soft bloom on a grape, the pale scar on a wrist, a line of letters that sums wages, the wrinkle that pleased a magistrate when a decision felt just. All of it will rise again tomorrow. All of it has risen for centuries, changing enough to stay alive, keeping enough to stay itself. You set the lamp on a shelf near the small gods of the doorway. Their faces shine for an instant, then quiet. Night settles deeper, and the city lowers its voice. The fountains keep an unhurried syllable, steady and low, water tasting stone and returning to silence. Courtyards grow cool, and the last lamps curl inward until a soft wick remains, a tiny ember under clay. Gardens that spent the day in sun now breathe the faint sweetness of crushed mint and damp earth. Above the roofs, a slow breeze carries distant river air, and far away an oar knocks once against a boat, then rests. Rooms remember hands that tidied them. A folded cloth waits without weight. A child's toy leans in the corner where a shadow makes a small harbor. The ledgers are closed and stacked like calm thoughts. The loom sleeps with its shuttle nested, the thread holding until morning. In a shrine near the door, two quiet figures receive the last crumb and share it with the kind of attention that requires no words. The floor holds the warmth of feet that crossed it in kindness. The walls hold the last echo of a lullaby. Streets dim and draw their own blanket. Doorways keep watch with chalk lines pale as moonlight. The bridges rest, each arch a quiet rib over black water. Somewhere a dog sighs and chooses a different stone to cool its ribs. Somewhere, a sentry counts to ease the hour and feels the count become a simple peace. The hills are dark shapes in a deeper dark, familiar even when they cannot be seen. The city's old shoulders under a sky that forgives. Breathe with Rome now. Let the day's names grow light. Let the carts and markets, the baths and benches, the flavors and voices settle into a slow wave that touches shore and then draws away, leaving the sand smooth. In the stillness, remember the ordinary courage of bread and water, of keys and thread, of laws written clearly and lamps kept safely. These are quiet guardians, steady as stars behind cloud. Your eyes grow heavy, the room cools, the city sleeps without forgetting you. And now you may drift into dreams of history. End of script. Sweet dreams.